Welcome, everyone, to Haunted Echoes, where we explore the forgotten, the doomed, and the truly terrifying. Tonight, we journey into the halls of decay, the corridors where hope once dwelled, now claimed by shadows. These are places where the sick were cared for, then abandoned, leaving behind stories echoing in emptiness. Stay close. The air turns cold in these wards, and the past is never far behind. Here are 25 creepiest abandoned hospitals in the USA. Make sure the lights are dim, your volume is up, and brace yourself for some times. What's unseen is the most horrifying. Pinehurst Asylum, tucked deep in the woods of Spring City, Pennsylvania, stands as one of America's most disturbing and haunted ruins. What was once envisioned as a beacon of hope for the mentally and physically disabled turned into a nightmare of neglect, abuse, and human suffering. Today, the decaying remains of its red brick buildings echo with the cries of the forgotten souls who once lived on, died within its walls. When Pinehurst State School and Hospital opened its doors in 1908, it was meant to serve as a progressive institution. The goal was to care for and educate individuals with disabilities, providing them with safety, treatment, and structure. For a time, it seemed to fulfill that mission. But as years passed and the population ballooned far beyond its intended capacity, the facility grew darker. Hallways that once promised care became corridors of cruelty. By the 1940s, more than 3,000 residents were crammed into buildings designed for half that number. Staff were overworked, undertrained, and often indifferent. The result was a world of silence and suffering hidden from public view. Reports began to leak of horrific mistreatment, patients left naked in filthy rooms, tied to their beds, or sitting for hours in their own waste. Children with mild disabilities were housed alongside severely disturbed adults. Many were beaten for disobedience or locked away for days as punishment. Medical care was minimal, education non-existent. Pinehurst became less of a hospital and more of a warehouse for those society had deemed unwanted. The facility's motto, "For the feeble-minded and epileptic," spoke volumes about the era's cruel disregard for human dignity. In the 1960s, an investigative news report titled "Suffer the Little Children" finally exposed the horrifying truth. Viewers across Pennsylvania were shocked as cameras revealed malnourished patients rocking back and forth, skeletal and vacant-eyed. The nation recoiled in outrage, and lawsuits soon followed. In 1968, Pinehurst was declared an inhumane institution, and in 1986, after nearly 8 decades of operation, it was shut down for good. The last staff members walked away, leaving behind a frozen moment in time. Beds were still made, wheelchairs lined the halls, and medical charts lay scattered across desks. It was as if everyone had simply vanished. But something many believe never left. When urban explorers and paranormal investigators began visiting the site in the decades following its closure, they reported strange and terrifying phenomena. The main administration building, with its long corridors and flaking paint, became infamous for violent cold spots and sudden noises echoing from empty rooms. Doors slam without warning, often hard enough to shake the walls. Visitors described feeling watched, as though unseen eyes follow them through the halls. In some places, faint whispers are captured on EVP recorders, pleas for help, cries of pain, or sometimes a simple, "Don't go." The underground tunnels, once used to move patients between buildings without exposing them to the outside world, are especially active. The air grows colder the deeper one walks, and some have reported seeing shadow figures darting just beyond the reach of their flashlights. Others claim to have heard the distant clatter of gurney wheels echoing through the darkness. Long after the hospital's equipment was abandoned, one investigator swore she heard the faint sound of children laughing then screaming from somewhere down the passage. When she turned to run, she found every flashlight in her group flickering violently before plunging into darkness. The Quaker building, used to house violent or uncontrollable patients, holds an especially sinister energy. Visitors often describe a suffocating pressure there, as if the air itself grows heavier. Many have captured electronic voice phenomena that seem to respond to direct questions. A man once asked aloud, "Did they hurt you here?" The recorder played back a faint, distorted yes. Another time, A group heard a raspy voice whisper, "Get out," seconds before a door slammed behind them, though the hallway was empty. One of the most chilling areas is the infirmary, where hundreds of patients died over the decades. The old operating room remains intact, surgical lights hanging lifeless above rusted tables. Investigators say their equipment malfunctions here more than anywhere else. Batteries drain instantly, cameras shut off, and strange electromagnetic spikes appear on their monitors. Some have felt invisible hands brush their arms or tug gently at their clothing. Others claim to have seen figures standing in the doorways, flickering like static, then fading into nothing. The auditorium, once a place for school plays and social gatherings, is another hotspot. Those who step onto the stage often hear footsteps pacing behind them, though no one else is present. In the balcony seats, people have seen full-bodied apparitions watching from the shadows. These are not fleeting glimpses. Some report seeing pale faces, eyes hollow and unblinking, locked on them until they flee the room. Even outside, the atmosphere is heavy. The overgrown courtyards seem to hum with energy, and many who visit describe a lingering sadness, as though the earth itself remembers the suffering. The wind sometimes carries faint moans or cries, even on still nights. Locals say lights flicker in the windows after midnight, and that if you stand near the old iron gates long enough, you can hear distant voices carried from the buildings beyond. Today, Pinehurst has become a destination for both thrill-seekers and serious paranormal investigators. Ghost tours and Halloween attractions operate on the grounds, but even seasoned employees refuse to go into certain buildings alone. Security guards tell of hearing footsteps when no one is around, or seeing figures move in the moonlit windows after closing time. Some believe the spirits of former patients are trapped there, confused and afraid, still reliving their suffering. Others think the asylum itself has absorbed the pain of its history, becoming a vessel of energy that will never rest. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, there's no denying the power of Pinehurst's presence. Its crumbling buildings and silent corridors are a haunting reminder of humanity as darker past a place where compassion failed and cruelty thrived. Those who visit leave with a sense that the walls themselves are alive, whispering stories of despair and loss. Pinehurst Asylum remains frozen between worlds, part historic ruin, part ghostly monument. Every creak, every whisper, every cold breath of air feels like a message from those who suffered within. They are the echoes of the forgotten, forever bound to the halls where they were once left behind. Waverly Hills Sanatorium looms over the hills of Louisville, Kentucky, like a monument to sorrow. Built in 1910 as a tuberculosis hospital, it was meant to be a sanctuary for the sick, a place of healing, rest, and care. But instead, it became a house of death, where tens of thousands took their last breath. Today, its crumbling walls and shadowed hallways hold the memory of those who suffered within. And many who visit claim that their restless spirits still walk the grounds. In the early 1900s, tuberculosis, then known as the White Plague, swept across America, claiming lives faster than doctors could save them. Louisville's humid climate and swampy air made it a breeding ground for the disease. And by 1910, the need for an isolated facility became urgent. Waverly Hills was built high on a hill to keep patients away from the city and its contamination. The isolation was meant to be therapeutic. The sanatorium was self-sufficient, with its own post office, water supply, and even a farm. Doctors believed that clean air, sunlight, and rest could cure the illness. But as the disease spread and death rates soared, Waverly Hills grew darker. By the 1920s, the sanatorium was filled beyond capacity. The echo of coughing could be heard day and night. Patients lay in open-air wards, wrapped in blankets even through freezing winters, as doctors insisted fresh air was essential. Some received experimental treatment, celium collapses, rib removals, and artificial pneumothorax procedures that left them scarred and suffering. Few survived. At the height of the epidemic, it's believed that an average of one person died every hour within those walls. To keep morale high among patients, the hospital's staff tried to hide the scale of death. Bodies were discreetly removed through a long, sloping passage beneath the building, later called the death tunnel or body chute. The tunnel stretched more than 500 feet down the hillside, leading to waiting hearses below. Carts carried the dead through the darkness, so those still alive wouldn't see how many were lost each day. For the doctors and nurses, it was practical. For the patients, it was merciful. But for the spirits that lingered, it became a pathway of sorrow, one that many believe is still haunted by the echoes of the dying. When antibiotics were discovered in the 1940s and tuberculosis began to fade, Waverly Hills closed its doors as a sanatorium in 1961. But death had already claimed too much of it. For a short time, it reopened as a geriatric center, caring for the elderly and mentally ill. Reports of neglect and abuse surfaced, and by 1982, it was shut down permanently. The massive building, with its Gothic arches and long corridors, was left to decay. Nature crept through broken windows, vines crawled along the walls, and silence filled the empty wards. As many would claim, it was never truly silent. Paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and skeptics alike have all come to Waverly Hills, drawn by the countless stories of ghostly activity. Nearly every hallway has a legend, and each room seems to have its own restless presence. Visitors report the sound of coughing and footsteps echoing through the halls, as though unseen patients still pace the floors. Some hear whispered conversations, faint cries for help, or the squeak of old gurney wheels rolling in the dark. Others speak of doors slamming shut on their own, or cold spots that move as if following them. One of the most famous apparitions is that of a nurse said to have hanged herself in room 502. According to local stories, she was found suspended from a light fixture in 1928, possibly driven to despair after discovering she was pregnant by a doctor or after contracting tuberculosis herself. People who enter that room often feel an overwhelming sense of dread or sadness. Some have captured shadows moving against the walls, while others have seen a figure of a woman in white standing silently near the doorway, head tilted downward as if reliving her final moments. Another haunting tale centers around the 5th floor, where the most mentally unstable patients were kept. The atmosphere there is suffocating. Flashlights die without reason, and whispers seem to come from nowhere. Many visitors claim to see figures darting through doorways or peering from behind windows. The elevator, that once carried patients up and down, is said to move by itself, its metal doors creaking open to reveal an empty shaft. Some have heard faint singing, as though nurses are still trying to comfort their long-lost patients. Down in the death tunnel, the air grows thick and heavy. Paranormal teams report electronic voice phenomena, soft voices, whispering names, crying, or simply repeating the word help. A few have seen shadowy shapes at the far end of the tunnel, moving closer before vanishing into the dark. Cameras malfunction here more than anywhere else. Batteries drain instantly, and audio devices record strange, static bursts that sometimes resemble labored breathing. One group once heard the unmistakable sound of gurney wheels rolling behind them, but when they turned, the tunnel was empty. The children's wing is another unsettling area. Staff once tried to provide a sense of normalcy for young patients. There were toys, games, and even a small playroom. Today, visitors leave balls in the hallway, only to watch them move on their own, as if unseen hands are still at play. Investigators often bring trigger objects like dolls and music boxes, and some report hearing laughter or humming when the air is otherwise still. It's said that one child named Timmy, who died at the hospital, especially enjoys playing with guests who bring toys. Even outside the main building, the energy lingers. The overgrown courtyards and empty balconies seem to hold the weight of 1,000 last breaths. Some nights, faint lights appear in the windows when no one is inside. Security guards who patrol the grounds describe hearing footsteps behind them, only to find themselves alone. The breeze that moves through the trees carries a faint scent of medicine and decay, as though time itself refuses to let go. Waverly Hills Sanatorium has been called the most spiritually active place in the world, and it's not hard to understand why. With more than 60,000 deaths rumored to have occurred there, the energy of that suffering remains imprinted in every brick, every corridor, every shadowed room. Those who visit often leave changed, haunted by what they've seen or what they've felt. Some believe the spirits trapped within simply want to be remembered. Others think the building itself has absorbed the pain of its past, replaying echoes of despair for anyone who dares to listen, even in decay. Waverly Hills stands as a chilling reminder of life and death intertwined, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is perilously thin. And on quiet nights, when the fog rolls down from the hills and the wind sweeps through the open windows, the sanatorium seems to come alive once more. The whispers of the lost drift through the halls, the echoes of footsteps fade into the dark, and somewhere, in the distance, a voice coughs, softly reminding us that the ghosts of Waverly Hills have never truly left. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum rises in the heart of West Virginia, its massive Gothic Revival architecture casting long shadows across the grounds. Built between 1858 and 1881, it was designed to be a sanctuary for the mentally ill, a place of peace, rest, and humane treatment. But as decades passed, the asylum became something far more sinister. Overcrowding, neglect, and unspeakable suffering turned it into one of the most haunted places in America. Today, though its halls are silent and much of it stands abandoned, visitors claim that echoes of the past still roam every corridor, whispering reminders of the pain that once filled its walls. The asylum was originally the dream of reformer Thomas Story Kirkbride, who believed that architecture could play a vital role in healing mental illness. His Kirkbride plan called for long, staggered wings to allow sunlight and fresh air into every room, believing these elements could soothe troubled minds. When construction began, the building was meant to house 250 patients, each with space, care, and calm surroundings. The central building rose like a castle, complete with tall spires, stone towers, and sweeping verandas. For a brief time, it represented hope. But as years turned to decades, that vision crumbled. The population inside grew far beyond its intended capacity. By the 1950s, the asylum held more than 2,400 patients, nearly 10 times what it was built to contain. The result was chaos. Hallways meant for quiet walks became overcrowded holding areas. Patients slept on floors, their beds packed tightly side by side. Food was scarce, cleanliness impossible, and staff struggled to control the mounting unrest. The building that was meant to heal became a place of torment, filled with screams that echoed down the stone corridors. The treatments of the time were often brutal and experimental. Doctors, desperate to control violent behavior or calm distressed minds, turned to crude procedures. Lobotomies were performed in makeshift operating rooms. Electroshock therapy was administered without anesthesia, and ice water baths were used to shock sanity back into the body. Isolation was common. Patients were locked alone in dark cells for weeks or months. Many never emerged the same. Some never emerged at all. The asylum's history is marked with tragedy. Fires, riots, and unexplained deaths plagued its wards. Patients killed each other in fits of rage. Some died of neglect, starvation, or exposure during the harsh winters. The screams that once filled the night are said to linger even now, carried through the halls by the wind that seeps through broken windows and crumbling plaster. After more than a century of operation, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum finally closed its doors in 1994. The state could no longer maintain the decaying building, and mental health practices had long since evolved beyond such institutions. When the last patient left, the asylum fell silent, but not for long. The emptiness of its sprawling 242,000 square feet soon drew the curious, the brave, and the terrified. What they found inside would make even skeptics question what lies beyond. Those who walk the halls today speak of an overwhelming feeling of being watched. It begins subtly, just a chill down the spine, the sense that someone is standing behind you. Then come the sounds, distant footsteps, soft whispers that fade when you listen, or the clanging of doors echoing through the darkness. Some claim to hear faint cries, as though the building itself remembers every voice that once pleaded for mercy. One of the most frequently seen spirits is that of a small boy, often spotted crouched in the corner of a long-abandoned ward. Visitors have reported hearing the faint sound of laughter or the rolling of a toy ball down the hallway, only to find no one there. Paranormal investigators have even left toys in his favorite room, returning to find them moved or spinning on their own. The boy's identity is unknown, but many believe he was the child of a patient, or perhaps a young resident, who perished within the asylum's walls. The women's ward is another area known for intense activity. People report seeing shadowy figures drifting from room to room, and the sound of sobbing echoing in the still air. One particular cell is infamous for sudden temperature drops. Guests have watched their breath fog even in the middle of summer. Some say the ghost of a former nurse roams the upper floors, her presence marked by the scent of old perfume and a flickering light that appears and vanishes without explanation. Then there's the Civil War, Wing 1 of the oldest parts of the building. During the war, the asylum was seized by both Union and Confederate forces at different times. The soldiers used it as a base, a prison, and even a makeshift hospital. Many died there, and their restless energy is said to remain. Investigators report hearing heavy boots stomping through empty halls, doors slamming violently, and voices calling out names from another century. EVP recordings have captured whispers saying "help us," "stay," or simply "leave." In the basement, where violent patients were once chained to the walls, the darkness seems almost alive. Visitors describe a suffocating pressure that grows stronger the deeper they go. Flashlights flicker, and strange shadows crawl across the walls. One room in particular is said to cause nausea and panic in anyone who enters, as if the building itself rejects the living. Some believe this area holds the spirits of those who were forgotten patients, who died in silence, buried in unmarked graves nearby. The massive central hall, with its peeling paint and collapsing ceilings, often echoes with footsteps when no one is there. Doors open and close with force, though no wind passes through. Guides leading tours through the asylum have felt invisible hands brush against their arms, or heard faint humming in their ears. One man swore he saw a figure staring from an upstairs window during a thunderstorm, yet the floor above him was completely empty. Even outside, the energy remains heavy. The asylum's sprawling grounds, once lush with gardens and patient walkways, now feel frozen in time. On foggy nights, locals claim to see faint lights moving through the windows, or to hear distant voices carried by the wind. Some say that the building itself breathes, that the air inside shifts like lungs expanding and contracting, alive with the weight of memory. To this day, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum stands as a towering reminder of the thin line between compassion and cruelty. Its halls, once filled with the suffering of thousands, seem unwilling to rest. Those who enter often leave, changed, haunted not only by what they've seen, but by what they've felt. For within those walls, the past never truly died. It lingers in every echo, every shadow, every silent gaze from the dark corners of the forgotten wards. And as night falls over Weston, the asylum seems to wake once more, its ghosts stirring in the gloom, forever waiting for someone to listen. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital once stood as one of New Jersey's most imposing landmarks, a vast and eerie monument to a century of madness, treatment, and tragedy. Opened in 1876 in Morris Plains, it was designed as a sanctuary for the mentally ill, a place meant to provide dignity and healing to those society had cast aside. But as the decades passed, that promise of compassion faded. Overcrowding, neglect, and experimental treatments turned Greystone into a house of shadows, where the line between care and cruelty blurred beyond recognition. Today, the hospital's decaying remains and haunted reputation have made it a place where history refuses to rest quietly. The original Greystone building was massive, a sprawling stone structure built in the Kirkbride style and architectural design meant to promote mental wellness through light, air, and symmetry. Stretching nearly a quarter-mile in length, its gray stone walls and towering wings dominated the surrounding landscape. The asylum was intended to house no more than 600 patients when it opened, each with their own room, fresh air, and access to outdoor grounds. In the early days, the philosophy was one of moral treatment, focusing on kindness, structured days, and exposure to nature. For a time, it seemed to work. But as the years passed and more people were committed, Greystone's halls grew crowded. By the 1930s and 1940s, more than 7,000 patients were crammed inside a building meant for a fraction of that number. The long hallways echoed with confusion and suffering. Beds lined the corridors, rooms overflowed, and even basements were turned into makeshift wards. Understaffed and overwhelmed, the hospital could no longer provide the care it once promised. Patients were left unattended, some restrained for days, others medicated into silence. The air grew heavy with the scent of antiseptic and despair. As medicine advanced, Greystone became a testing ground for controversial psychiatric treatments. Doctors experimented with insulin shock therapy, hydrotherapy, and electroconvulsive procedures. In the 1950s, lobotomies were performed on patients considered uncontrollable or hopeless. These treatments often left individuals docile, vacant, or worse. For many, the cure was as terrible as the illness itself. Reports of abuse and neglect surfaced throughout the decades. But the hospital continued to operate, a silent city of the forgotten. Over time, the outside world began to change. New medications, improved psychiatric care, and social reform movements called for the closure of large state hospitals. Patients were released to community programs, and Greystone's once crowded halls slowly emptied. In 1977, most of the original Kirkbride building was shut down, and by the early 2000s, the hospital's final wards were closed. What remained was a ghost of its former self, a decaying shell of stone and steel, its windows shattered, its walls overgrown with ivy. Nature began reclaiming what humanity had abandoned. But even in ruin, Greystone was not silent. Urban explorers and paranormal investigators who dared to enter the deserted complex described the place frozen in time. Peeling paint hung like paper ribbons from the ceilings. Old patient files littered the floors, and rusted bed frames stood where lives once unraveled. Yet the emptiness never felt truly empty. Many who wandered its corridors reported hearing whispers, soft voices echoing from behind sealed doors. Some claimed they heard their names being called when no one else was present. Others described the sound of phantom footsteps following them through the dark, stopping when they stopped, moving when they moved. The power to the hospital had long been cut off, yet flickering lights were often seen in the upper floors. Explorers who ventured close to the old wards spoke of seeing faint glows moving from room to room, as though someone carried a lantern through the halls. Security guards and local residents also reported lights flashing in the windows late at night, though the buildings were empty and locked. On certain nights, the sound of doors slamming echoes across the grounds, carried by the wind, but those who investigate find no one there and no open doors. Some of the most unsettling reports come from the sealed wings sections of the hospital closed for decades, their entrances bricked or bolted shut. Those who approach these areas say they can hear faint crying from the other side, or the soft murmur of voices in conversation. It's as though the walls themselves remember. Others describe hearing an intercom buzzing faintly, even though the system hasn't worked in years. More than one visitor has claimed to hear a nurse's voice over the static whispering instructions to invisible patients in one of the old treatment wards. People have reported sudden drops in temperature and the sound of gurney wheels rolling across the floor. Some have seen shadowy figures darting at the edge of their vision, black shapes that vanish when approached. A few investigators have captured disembodied voices on EVP recordings, short, pleading phrases like "help me" or "don't leave." These same recordings often capture distant humming, as if someone is softly singing an old lullaby. The hospital's chapel, though long abandoned, remains one of its most eerie locations. Visitors say it feels unnaturally still, the air thick with sorrow. Footsteps are sometimes heard echoing down the aisles, and faint organ music seems to play from nowhere. One story tells of a man who entered the chapel alone and heard a woman's voice whisper "pray" directly in his ear. When he turned around, the pews behind him were empty. Even the grounds themselves seemed to hold strange energy. On foggy nights, shapes move across the lawns, figures that disappear when approached. Locals who pass by the site have reported hearing distant screams or the echo of laughter carried on the breeze. Some say they've seen a pale figure standing at an upper window of the main building, staring out over the property long after the last light has gone. Though most of the original Greystone complex was demolished in 2015, many believe its spirits remain. The earth beneath still holds the echoes of the thousands who lived and died there. The tunnels beneath the building, once used to transport patients and supplies, are said to be especially active. People who enter them describe an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the faint drip of water and, sometimes, footsteps that don't belong to the living. Even now, as weeds cover the land and the stone foundation crumbles, Greystone's memory refuses to fade. The hospital's dark legacy lingers in every whisper of wind, every flicker of shadow that passes through its ruins. Those who once suffered within its walls seem unwilling to be forgotten. The sound of their voices still drifts through the night, calling softly from wards long sealed, from rooms that no longer exist, reminders that the ghosts of Greystone have not yet found peace. Danvers State Hospital stands in the quiet hills of Massachusetts as both a monument to architectural ambition and a grim reminder of the darker side of psychiatric care in America. Constructed in 1874, it was originally designed under the Kirkbride Plan, a philosophy that believed architecture could heal the mind. Long, staggered wings were intended to provide sunlight and fresh air, with high ceilings and spacious rooms offering patients a sense of calm. From the outside, Danvers looked magnificent, its towering spires, intricate brickwork, and sweeping corridors gave the impression of safety and order. But inside, the story was far different. From its earliest years, Danvers struggled with overcrowding. While the building was designed for a few hundred patients, by the 1880s it was filled beyond capacity. Patients of all ages and mental conditions were housed together, many in beds lined along hallways or in crowded dormitories. Resources were stretched thin, and staff were often overworked and undertrained. The goal of compassionate care soon gave way to routine management of human suffering. Patients endured strict schedules, isolation, and the cold discipline of an era that misunderstood mental illness. Medical procedures at Danvers were often experimental, reflecting the limited understanding of psychiatric conditions at the time. Treatments ranged from hydrotherapy, where patients were immersed in cold or hot water for hours, to insulin shock therapy, which induced temporary comas. Electroconvulsive therapy was also used, frequently administered without anesthesia in the early decades. Lobotomies were performed in the mid-20th century, leaving patients vacant and docile. These interventions were meant to treat, but often caused permanent damage. Many patients died under mysterious circumstances, and the combination of neglect, disease, and harsh treatment left a heavy toll on those who remained. By the mid-20th century, the hospital's population had swelled to more than 1,000, far beyond its intended capacity. The hallways, once designed to be airy and light-filled, became claustrophobic and dark. Patients were sometimes restrained to their beds or confined in padded rooms for days at a time. Others wandered aimlessly through the wings, their cries echoing off the high ceilings. Nurses and attendants struggled to maintain control, often moving from one emergency to the next, leaving little time for genuine care. Overcrowding, stress, and the lack of resources created an environment that was as frightening for staff as it was for patients. Danvers State Hospital finally closed its doors in 1992, after over a century of operation. Like many abandoned asylums, it left behind a landscape of decay and memory. Its massive brick buildings and towering wings, once symbols of hope, were left to rot. Windows shattered, roofs caved, and nature began reclaiming the grounds. Yet even in abandonment, the hospital seemed far from empty. Those who step inside the abandoned wings report an overwhelming sense of being watched. The corridors, though silent, seem to hum with unseen activity. Shadows dart just out of sight, and the echo of distant footsteps follows intruders from room to room. In some areas, a faint chill hangs in the air, and sudden drops in temperature are common, as if the building itself remembers the suffering it once contained. Crawl spaces beneath the hospital, long sealed and neglected, are particularly unnerving. People who enter these cramped tunnels describe an oppressive feeling, as though unseen eyes are upon them. Strange odors faint hints of antiseptic, decayed wood, and something more indefinable, like the lingering memory of fear waft through the air. Even in daylight, explorers report hearing faint whispers, sometimes indistinguishable phrases, other times soft, urgent cries. The women's wards are among the most active areas. Visitors often claim to see apparitions in the corners of their vision, fleeting shapes that vanish when directly observed. Some report hearing soft, mournful voices singing or talking, while others describe a sensation of being gently but insistently followed down empty hallways. Doors in these wings occasionally swing open or shut on their own, and lights flicker despite the absence of electricity. The children's wing, though long abandoned, carries a unique energy. Some claim to hear the patter of small feet across the old wooden floors, or the distant laughter of a child. Dolls left behind in the rooms are sometimes found moved or tipped over, as if interacted with by unseen hands. Those exploring this section often feel a mix of curiosity and unease, sensing both innocence and sadness lingering in the shadows. In the main hall, the grand architecture seems almost alive with memory. The high ceilings amplify sounds, turning distant noises into eerie echoes. Steps that should carry no weight appear to follow visitors, while the faintest creak can sound like a patient pacing above. Some have reported seeing ghostly figures standing at the end of hallways, their outlines blurred, their presence palpable. Others have captured electronic voice phenomena, whispers that seem to call their names or issue soft warnings to leave. Even the outside grounds reflect the building's restless energy. Overgrown gardens and crumbling paths, once meticulously maintained, seem to hold on to the voices of those who walked them decades ago. On foggy nights, shapes are sometimes seen moving in the windows, and locals claim to hear the faintest calls echoing from the sealed wards. Security personnel have occasionally reported lights flashing in the empty buildings, footsteps trailing behind them, or the sense of someone or something moving alongside them unseen. Danvers State Hospital serves as a haunting reminder of both architectural ambition and human suffering. Its towering spires, once meant to symbolize hope, now loom over the land as silent witnesses to the history within. Those who enter the abandoned halls often leave with the sense that the hospital is alive not in the way of the living, but in the way of memory, pain, and lingering presence. The shadows, whispers, and fleeting apparitions are echoes of the countless lives that passed through its doors. Some lost, some changed, and some unwilling to leave. Even in decay, Danvers State Hospital refuses to fade quietly. Its hallways, crawl spaces, and abandoned wings continue to whisper the stories of the past. Explorers and investigators who enter find themselves both captivated and unnerved, walking among the remnants of suffering that remain etched into the walls. In every shadow, in every flicker of light, in every unexplained sound, the echoes of Danvers history persist, reminding all who enter that the past is never truly gone. And some spirits are not content to rest. Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, Georgia, stands as a colossal relic of America's psychiatric history. Once the largest mental health institution in the world, it housed over 12,000 patients at its peak, sprawling across acres of land with buildings designed to accommodate thousands of lives. Constructed in the mid-19th century, the hospital was initially envisioned as a place of care, where those with mental illness could be treated with compassion and modern medical methods. But over the decades, neglect, overcrowding, and outdated practices turned Central State into a labyrinth of despair, a place where countless patients were left to suffer, die, or disappear into anonymity. Today, though many sections are abandoned and crumbling, the hospital's legacy refuses to vanish, lingering in shadows, whispers, and sightings that haunt visitors to this day. The scale of Central State was staggering. Buildings stretched along endless corridors, each designed to house hundreds of patients in dormitory-style rooms. Initially, the hospital operated under the belief that fresh air, work, and routine could heal troubled minds. Patients were expected to participate in occupational therapy, tending gardens, working on farms, or assisting with maintenance. For some, these measures offered comfort and purpose, but for many, the sheer number of patients and lack of individualized care meant life at the hospital became a daily struggle for survival. Overcrowding quickly became the norm. By the early 20th century, beds were stacked in hallways, and wards overflowed beyond capacity. Nurses and staff, overwhelmed and undertrained, could only attend to the most urgent needs, leaving thousands in neglect. Medical treatments were often experimental and harsh. Electroconvulsive therapy, insulin-induced comas, and lobotomies were administered with little regard for consent or aftercare. Some patients were restrained for days or weeks, confined to cages or padded rooms. Diseases spread rapidly, and many patients died from conditions that went untreated. Bodies were sometimes removed quietly, leaving few records of their final moments. The combination of overcrowding, experimental medicine, and lack of oversight meant that death was a constant presence within the hospital walls. Generations of patients entered seeking help, yet many left only as forgotten names on a ledger or unmarked graves in the hospital cemetery. Despite the passage of time, Central State Hospital has become a magnet for urban explorers and paranormal investigators. The remaining buildings, though crumbling and overgrown, retain the energy of those who once inhabited them. Visitors often describe an overwhelming feeling of being watched. Hallways stretch into darkness, windows shattered or boarded up. Yet, from these windows, many report seeing shadowy figures, patients frozen in time, peering silently from behind broken glass. These figures are fleeting, disappearing when approached, leaving only the sensation that someone is standing just out of sight. The nights at Central State are especially unsettling. Many witnesses claim to hear cries echoing across the campus, moans of despair, distant sobbing, or the hollow wails of patients long gone. Sometimes these sounds seem to come from the ground itself, rising from basements, tunnels, or abandoned wards. Other times, the cries appear to drift across the lawns and courtyards, as though former patients are wandering the grounds, trapped between the past and the present. These auditory phenomena are often accompanied by sudden drops in temperature, cold drafts in empty rooms, or the faint scent of antiseptic and decay lingering in the air. Inside the remaining structures, shadows are the most commonly reported phenomenon. Figures move across walls and floors, vanishing when approached, yet leaving a lingering impression of presence. Some visitors claim to have seen full-bodied apparitions sitting in old wheelchairs, pacing hallways, or standing silently in doorways. The dormitory wings are particularly active, with shadowy forms gliding through the rows of empty beds. These glimpses are often accompanied by an uneasy feeling, as if the observers are intruding on lives that have not fully departed. The hospital's basements and service tunnels hold some of the most intense activity. Dark and cramped, these areas were once used for maintenance, storage, and the discreet movement of patients who could no longer be cared for in the main wards. Today, explorers report a heavy, suffocating atmosphere, with sounds of footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Some have recorded voices on electronic devices, whispers calling names, murmuring pleas, or simply repeating the word, leave. Shadows seem more pronounced in these areas, moving along walls or across doorways in ways that defy logic. It is as if the spirits of patients who were forgotten in these hidden spaces continue to wander, seeking acknowledgement or escape. Even the exterior grounds of Central State are steeped in eerie activity. Overgrown gardens, cracked sidewalks, and derelict structures hold the weight of decades of suffering. Witnesses describe fleeting figures crossing the lawns at twilight or glimpsing patients standing in the fog near windows of abandoned buildings. Some claim to see former staff moving among the shadows, attending to unseen tasks, while the restless energy of patients seems to ripple across the property. The air feels heavy, charged with sorrow and memories, as if the land itself remembers every life that passed through the hospital's doors. The legacy of Central State Hospital is complex. It is a story of hope and ambition, of the desire to care for the mentally ill. Yet, it is equally a story of neglect, overcrowding, and human suffering. The ruins, the shadows, and the sounds serve as a chilling reminder of that history. Visitors often leave the site changed, haunted by fleeting glimpses of lives once contained within the walls. They speak of the persistent feeling of being followed through corridors, of whispers that linger long after they have exited, and of the sight of shadowy patients, glimpsed in windows, still wandering, still waiting. Central State Hospital remains one of the most compelling haunted locations in the United States. Its decaying buildings, overgrown grounds, and lingering spirits offer a glimpse into the history of psychiatric care while serving as a monument to those who suffered within. The cries, shadows, and apparitions are more than folklore. They are echoes of a time when the hospital was alive, with thousands of stories. Many tragic, many lost, but all leaving an indelible mark. Even in abandonment, the presence of Central State is palpable. A reminder that some places never forget, and some spirits never leave. The Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane, located in Buffalo, New York, stands as a striking reminder of both architectural ambition and human tragedy. Completed in the late 19th century, the asylum was designed in the Richardsonian Romanesque style. Its massive stone walls, towering arches, and imposing towers meant to convey stability, order, and care. From the outside, it is a grand, awe-inspiring structure, one that could have been mistaken for a fortress or a cathedral. Yet, behind its ornate facades, the asylum held a very different story, a story of suffering, neglect, and countless lives lost in the pursuit of treatment for mental illness. Originally built to house a few hundred patients, the asylum's population soon far exceeded its capacity. By the early 20th century, more than 2,000 men, women, and children were confined within its sprawling wings. The crowded conditions were harsh. Patients were packed into dormitory-style rooms. Hallways became makeshift sleeping quarters, and the staff struggled to maintain order under enormous pressure. While the institution's original mission was one of care and rehabilitation, the reality quickly devolved into neglect. Individuals with mental illness were treated more as problems to manage than people in need of help. Medical treatments of the era were rudimentary at best and often cruel. Electroconvulsive therapy, insulin shock treatments, and the occasional lobotomy were administered to control behavior or attempt cures for ailments that were poorly understood. Many patients were restrained for long periods, confined to padded cells or strapped to beds in the hope of calming agitation. Disease spread quickly in the overcrowded wards, and countless patients died from infections or conditions that went untreated. The deaths of these individuals were often undocumented or buried in unmarked graves, leaving behind only shadows of their existence within the walls of the asylum. The building itself, with its soaring ceilings, long corridors, and stone staircases, seems to hold the memory of every life that passed through it. Those who explore the abandoned asylum today speak of a profound sense of presenza, feeling that the walls themselves remember the suffering that occurred within them. Visitors often report hearing voices echoing through empty hallways, indistinct whispers that seem to call out from rooms long sealed. Sometimes the voices are soft murmurs. Other times, they take the shape of urgent cries, as though someone is still pleading for help decades after their death. Cold spots are a common occurrence in the asylum's remaining wings. Walk into certain rooms, and the air can drop suddenly, leaving visitors shivering even in summer. Many describe the sensation of being watched, a prickling awareness that grows stronger the further they move into the abandoned corridors. Shadows appear at the corners of vision, fleeting shapes that vanish when directly observed. Some explorers have captured photographs showing dark forms or misty figures that seem to linger over chairs or near doorways. It is as if the spirits of past patients continue to occupy the spaces they once lived in, unable or unwilling to move on. Certain areas of the asylum are particularly active. The women's ward, for example, is said to hold a heavy, oppressive energy. Visitors report hearing the soft sound of sewing machines, laughter, or distant footsteps, despite the building being empty for decades. In the men's wards, voices often take on a harsher tone, the echo of angry shouting, rapid pacing, and doors slamming without explanation. Some claim that the treatment rooms themselves radiate a chilling presence, where the shadows of past medical procedures seem to replay silently for anyone sensitive enough to notice. The attic and upper floors are perhaps the most unnerving. Narrow staircases twist through darkness, and the ceilings above creak as if bearing weight far beyond the structural explorers. Often speak of hearing children crying or playing, their sounds echoing through spaces where no living person is present. Shadows appear on the walls in the shape of small figures, disappearing when approached. Flashlights flicker inexplicably, and electronic devices sometimes fail entirely in these areas, as though the building itself resists intrusion. On foggy nights, shapes can sometimes be seen moving in the upper story windows, appearing as figures frozen mid-motion before vanishing again. Those who pass the site often report a sense of unease, a weight that seems to emanate from the asylum itself, reminding visitors of the thousands of lives contained within its walls. The asylum's Richardsonian architecture contributes to the haunting atmosphere. Its arches and turrets, designed to inspire calm and order, now cast long, dark shadows that twist through hallways and stairwells. The stone walls, once thought to be solid and protective, feel cold and oppressive, as if absorbing the emotions of everyone who ever lived, worked, or died inside. Every step across its creaking floors carries the weight of memory, and every gust of wind through broken windows seems to carry faint whispers from the past. Paranormal investigators have long been drawn to Buffalo State Asylum, documenting unexplained phenomena with audio recorders, cameras, and electromagnetic sensors. Many report capturing electronic voice phenomena, distorted, whispering voices that seem to respond to questions, calling out names or repeating phrases like "help me" or "don't leave." Some claim to hear footsteps pacing hallways or the clanging of metal beds moving across the floor. Others describe the sensation of a presence brushing past them, or the feeling of hands gripping their shoulders in a place where no one should be. Despite its abandonment, the asylum's legacy endures. The crumbling stone, the broken windows, and the decaying interiors are a physical testament to a history of suffering and neglect. Those who venture inside often leave with a deep sense of unease, haunted not only by the history they witness, but by the lingering presence of those who never truly left. Buffalo State Asylum is more than an architectural marvel. It is a vessel for memory and energy, a place where the past clings to the present, and where the echoes of pain, fear, and lost lives continue to drift through the halls, waiting for anyone willing to see, hear, or feel them. Even now, as ivy crawls along its stone walls and the structure slowly succumbs to time, the asylum whispers, from shadowed corridors to empty rooms, from the upper floors to the broken lawns outside. The spirits of Buffalo State remain. They remind us that behind every grand facade, there are stories, many tragic, many forgotten, all leaving a mark that time cannot erase. Visitors walk its halls, hearing voices, feeling icy drafts, and glimpsing shadows, realizing that some places, no matter how abandoned, never truly become empty. Traverse City State Hospital, originally known as the Northern Michigan Asylum, sits quietly atop a hill overlooking Traverse City, Michigan, its sprawling campus now a haunting relic of the past. Opened in the late 19th century, the hospital was envisioned as a self-sufficient institution where patients with mental illness could live and be treated in a controlled, rehabilitative environment. It even had its own farm, power plant, and workshops, intended to teach patients skills, provide work therapy, and sustain the facility's daily operations. But as the years went on, the asylum became a site of overcrowding, neglect, and suffering. Today, its crumbling buildings, rusting infrastructure, and abandoned belongings serve as a stark reminder of the thousands of lives that passed through its doors, lives that were often forgotten. From the beginning, Northern Michigan Asylum was ambitious. Its architecture reflected the ideals of the era: long, symmetrical wings intended to provide light, air, and space for recovery, high ceilings, wide hallways, and large windows were designed to make patients feel cared for and to promote mental well-being. The hospital's self-sufficiency was part of this philosophy. Patients tended crops on the hospital farm, assisted in maintenance of the power plant, and helped in workshops producing goods for the institution. Work was seen as both therapeutic and practical, a way to occupy minds and instill a sense of purpose. Yet, as patient numbers increased, the ideals of treatment gave way to harsh realities. By the mid-20th century, the facility was overcrowded, holding far more patients than it had been designed to accommodate. Dormitories overflowed, and hallways were lined with beds to make room for the growing population. Staff were stretched thin, often unable to provide the care necessary for such large numbers. Many patients went without adequate supervision, medical attention, or comfort. Disease and despair spread through the building like a shadow, leaving an indelible mark on the lives of those inside. Medical practices at Traverse City were typical of the time, but often brutal by modern standards. Electroconvulsive therapy, cold water baths, and insulin-induced comas were used to control behavior or attempt treatment. Patients who became violent or unmanageable were sometimes restrained or isolated for long periods. Records from the era show that illness, neglect, and experimentation often led to death. Many patients passed away quietly, without family or friends to remember them. The abandoned sections of the hospital still hold remnants of these lives: rusted beds, faded documents, old clothing, and personal belongings left behind when wings were closed. These items, frozen in time, create a chilling sense of presence, a physical memory of suffering that lingers in the air. Even in its current state of decay, Traverse City State Hospital continues to draw those who are curious, daring, or seeking the supernatural. Urban explorers report that entering the hospital is like stepping into a time capsule of the past. Broken windows allow shafts of light to illuminate peeling paint and rusting metal. Floors creak underfoot, sometimes with a sound that seems heavier than the weight of the explorers themselves. Shadows appear at the corners of vision, moving along walls or across hallways, only to vanish when looked at directly. The feeling of being watched is pervasive, and many report a deep sense of unease that grows as they move deeper into the abandoned wings. Spectral activity has been reported throughout the campus. Some visitors have claimed to see figures pacing the hallways at dusk, tall and indistinct, gliding along corridors with a purpose that seems eerily human. Others describe hearing distant screams echoing through the empty wings, chilling cries of fear or despair that stop abruptly when approached. In certain rooms, the temperature drops dramatically, leaving an icy chill on skin even in summer months. Objects left behind by patients' books, dishes, or simple personal items are sometimes found moved or disturbed, though no one is there to touch them. The hospital's farm and power plant, long abandoned, also carry a sense of spectral energy. Walkways are overgrown, and machinery is rusted. Yet visitors report feeling the impression of movement, as if unseen figures are tending to the fields or operating equipment. Echoes of voices sometimes drift across the property, faint but persistent, as though recalling conversations that took place decades ago. Some have heard footsteps on gravel paths or in empty corridors, footsteps that stop when one stops, only to continue when movement resumes. Certain wings of the hospital are considered particularly active. The upper floors of the main building, once dormitories for patients, are often the site of ghostly sightings. Shadows move along walls, figures appear at the ends of hallways, and some claim to hear whispered names or fragments of conversation. Crawl spaces and basements are said to carry a heavier, more oppressive energy, with unexplained cold spots and the sensation of presence that grows almost suffocating. Visitors describe the sound of doors slamming, distant laughter, and occasionally the faint echo of someone pacing back and forth. Despite its decay, Traverse City State Hospital remains a testament to both human ambition and human suffering. The sprawling campus, with its broken structures and abandoned rooms, tells the story of a facility that was once alive with activity, care, and labor, but also with sorrow, fear, and neglect. Every shattered window, Every rusted bed frame, every document left behind holds a piece of that history. Those who enter cannot help but feel that the walls themselves remember the lives that passed through them, the joys, the struggles, and the tragedies. Even in abandonment, the hospital feels alive with memory. Shadows linger in the hallways, whispers drift through empty rooms, and distant cries echo across the grounds. The legacy of Traverse City State Hospital is one of duality. It is both an architectural marvel and a monument to suffering, both a historical treasure and a site of haunted memory. Visitors walk its halls not just as explorers but as witnesses, sensing the lives that were lived and lost, and leaving with the impression that, while the hospital may be empty of the living, it will never be empty of history or of the echoes of those who remain. Kings Park Psychiatric Center, located on Long Island, New York, stands today as a sprawling relic of a bygone era, its massive stone buildings and endless wings now falling into decay. Opened in 1885 as the Kings Park State Hospital, it was built to house thousands of patients, providing care to those suffering from mental illness in an era when treatment was often experimental and harsh. At its peak, the hospital's population exceeded 9,000, turning it into one of the largest psychiatric institutions in the United States. The facility's vast size, combined with its complex history, has left it a place steeped in legend and haunted lore, where the echoes of suffering linger in every crumbling corridor. The hospital was designed under the Kirkbride Plan, a philosophy that emphasized long, staggered wings intended to provide patients with light, fresh air, and views of the surrounding landscape. The architecture was imposing, with high ceilings, stone facades, and enormous windows meant to inspire calm and order. On paper, Kings Park represented progress, an institution that combined medical care with a controlled restorative environment. Patients worked on the hospital farm, tended gardens, and participated in occupational therapy programs meant to occupy their minds and give them a sense of purpose. But as the years went on, the ideals of treatment would collide with overcrowding, understaffing, and the realities of long-term confinement. By the early 20th century, Kings Park was filled far beyond its intended capacity. Hallways became makeshift wards, dormitories overflowed, and entire floors were devoted to patients with little to no supervision. The staff, often overwhelmed and undertrained, struggled to maintain order. Patients were treated with a combination of therapies that at times could be brutal. Electroconvulsive therapy, insulin-induced comas, and lobotomies were performed to manage mental illness. Restraints were common, and isolation was used extensively. Many patients died in obscurity, their lives recorded only on paper, with few families present to remember them. The hospital, meant as a sanctuary, became a place of suffering. As the decades passed, Kings Park gained a reputation for its eerie atmosphere. Reports of unusual activity began to emerge long before the hospital closed. Staff and visitors described unexplained sounds, doors opening and closing without cause, faint cries echoing down hallways, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Patients themselves often reported seeing shadows in the corners of rooms or sensing presences where none should be. Even the hospital's massive halls seemed to carry an oppressive weight, imbued with the emotions of thousands of lives spent within. The hospital finally began to decline in the latter half of the 20th century. Advances in psychiatric medicine, combined with social reforms that emphasized community-based care, led to a decrease in patient populations. By the 1990s, Kings Park was largely abandoned, though some administrative functions continued for a time. Today, much of the campus is left to rot, roofs collapse, windows shatter, and weeds overtake once manicured lawns. Yet the buildings remain remarkably intact, a frozen time capsule of institutional life and human suffering. Visitors who explore the abandoned wings of Kings Park often describe unsettling phenomena. Beds that have long been empty appear to move slightly, as though nudged by invisible hands. Lights flicker in hallways where electricity has long been disconnected, casting shadows that stretch unnaturally across peeling walls. Footsteps echo through corridors where no one walks, and doors swing open or slam shut without explanation. Some have reported hearing muffled voices, the sound of whispers or shouting carried through the emptiness, as though the patients themselves are replaying the memories of their confinement. Certain wings of the hospital are particularly active. The upper floors, once dormitories for long-term patients, are said to be thick with residual energy. Shadows dot along walls or across hallways, disappearing when approached. Some visitors claim to have glimpsed figures in windows, standing silently and watching from inside, only to vanish when they move closer. Crawl spaces and basements also carry a sense of weight and oppression, with unexplained cold spots and a feeling of being followed. Footsteps, whispers, and even the faint sound of music sometimes drift from these spaces, unnerving those who dare to enter. The hospital's treatment rooms and surgical wards are sites of frequent paranormal reports. Explorers have reported seeing surgical tables moved, instruments shifting as if recently used, and shadows hovering in the corners. Some claim to hear the faint whirring of old machinery or the clanging of equipment long since removed. The lingering sense of pain, fear, and confusion seems concentrated in these areas, and many who enter feel an immediate heaviness pressing down upon them. Even the exterior grounds of Kings Park carry a haunting energy. Overgrown gardens and cracked walkways, once maintained by staff and patients, now stretch across empty fields. Visitors have seen figures pacing outside at dusk or moving through the windows of abandoned wings. On foggy nights, sounds of distant voices and footsteps drift across the property, echoing through the broken facades. The combination of nature reclaiming the land and the remnants of institutional life creates an atmosphere both eerie and surreal. Kings Park Psychiatric Center is more than a series of abandoned buildings. It is a monument to the countless lives spent within its walls. Its decaying wings, sealed rooms, and rusting infrastructure bear witness to a history of care, neglect, and suffering. Those who explore the campus often leave with a sense that the hospital itself is alive in some way, that it remembers the lives of its patients, the work of its staff, and the weight of decades of human emotion. Shadows, whispers, moving beds, flickering lights, and distant footsteps all serve as reminders that Kings Park has not truly been emptied of its past. Today, Kings Park stands as a chilling reminder of the complexities of mental health care and the fragility of human life within institutional walls. Its presence is both historical and spectral, a combination of architecture, memory, and lingering energy that continues to captivate, terrify, and haunt those who venture into its abandoned halls. The echoes of thousands of patients and countless stories of suffering persist, frozen in time, waiting for anyone willing to step inside and witness what remains of one of New York's most infamous psychiatric institutions. Forest Haven, located in Laurel, Maryland, is a haunting reminder of the darker side of institutional care in America. Opened in 1925, the facility was originally designed to provide care for children and adults with intellectual disabilities, promising shelter, education, and treatment in an era when society often neglected those who were different. Spread across sprawling grounds with multiple dormitories, classrooms, and therapy areas, the institution was intended to serve as a refuge. Yet over decades, Forest Haven became a place defined by neglect, suffering, and tragedy, leaving a legacy that continues to echo through its abandoned halls. In its early years, Forest Haven operated under the ideals of the time, offering structured routines, vocational training, and supervised activities. Residents, children, and adults alike participated in daily chores, classes, and recreational activities designed to teach skills and occupy their days. At first, the institution functioned as a controlled environment where staff could monitor residents' care. Yet, as the population grew, the facility became overwhelmed. By mid-century, the number of residents far exceeded the capacity the hospital was built to handle. Dormitories overflowed, staff were overworked and undertrained, and supervision became minimal. Basic necessities, adequate food, hygiene, and medical attention were often lacking, and many residents suffered as a result. Medical care and treatment at Forest Haven were inconsistent and, at times, neglectful. Chronic illnesses often went untreated. Minor injuries could become serious, and mental health support was minimal. Reports from the late 20th century revealed a shocking pattern of abuse, neglect, and poor conditions. Residents were left in unsanitary rooms, sometimes restrained for extended periods, and often isolated from the outside world. Families who attempted to intervene frequently found their concerns dismissed. Over time, the institution gained a reputation not for care, but for indifference. A place where the vulnerable were forgotten. One of the most harrowing aspects of Forest Haven was its cemetery. For decades, residents who died were buried on the property, many in unmarked graves. Families were often unaware of the location of their loved ones' final resting places. It was only after public outcry and legal pressure that the mass graves were acknowledged and finally marked with proper memorials, giving names and dignity back to those who had been forgotten. Even today, the weight of this history is palpable on the grounds, a solemn reminder of lives lived and lost behind institutional walls. When the facility closed in 1991, it left behind a decaying campus, frozen in time. Dormitories, classrooms, therapy rooms, and medical facilities still contain remnants of the past: broken beds, rusted wheelchairs, faded charts, and worn furniture. The peeling paint, cracked floors, and shattered windows create a tangible sense of abandonment, as though the building itself is mourning the decades of suffering that took place inside. Those who explore Forest Haven today describe it as a time capsule, with every room holding the imprint of past lives, struggles, and forgotten stories. Visitors often report strange occurrences throughout the grounds and inside the buildings. Shadows appear at the corners of vision, moving quickly out of sight when approached. Whispers are frequently heard in empty hallways, faint voices that seem to call names or murmur unintelligible phrases. Doors swing open or shut on their own, and floors creak as if someone unseen is pacing back and forth. Some explorers have described the sensation of being watched, a persistent feeling that grows stronger the longer they remain within the halls. Certain areas are particularly noted for activity. Dormitory wings, once crowded with residents, are often the site of reported apparitions. Shadowy figures are said to move along corridors, sometimes appearing as children, other times as adults, pausing as if observing intruders before vanishing. Therapy rooms, where residents once participated in daily activities, sometimes feel oppressively cold, and electronic devices occasionally fail or flicker without explanation. Even stairwells and basements, dark and narrow, carry a heavy energy, with echoes of distant voices, soft footsteps, and unexplained sounds that seem to ripple through the building. The outdoor spaces, though overgrown and neglected, also hold residual presence. Paths once traveled daily by residents now wind through weeds and tall grass, yet visitors have claimed to see figures walking along them at dusk, glimpses of people long gone. The weight of history is tangible here. The laughter, cries, and footsteps of decades of residents seem to linger in the very air. Those who walk the grounds often describe a mix of sadness, unease, and an almost physical sense of presence, as though the memories of Forest Haven refuse to remain confined to the walls. Forest Haven's story is not only one of neglect and suffering, but also a cautionary tale about the treatment of vulnerable populations. Its decaying buildings, abandoned equipment, and long-forgotten objects serve as reminders of institutional failure and the human cost of systemic neglect. Yet, for those who explore it today, the site is also a place of reflection, where the past can be acknowledged, remembered, and honored. The whispers, shadows, and lingering energy are not simply phenomena. They are the echoes of lives that deserve recognition, even decades later. Even in ruin, Forest Haven continues to hold the memory of those who lived and died there. Its halls, dormitories, and outdoor spaces carry a presence that is difficult to ignore. Shadowy figures, faint voices, and the chilling sensation of being watched remind visitors that the building is more than abandoned. It is a vessel for memory, grief, and unfinished stories. Those who enter the property often leave changed, haunted by the lingering sense of lives lived in isolation and suffering. and by the realization that the echoes of Forest Haven's history refused to be silenced. The abandoned halls and crumbling grounds of Forest Haven remain as a testament to both human vulnerability and resilience. Though the institution has closed and the outside world has moved on, the spirits of the residents, along with the memories of their struggles, continue to inhabit the place. Broken equipment, empty rooms, and shadowed corners are not merely reminders of neglect. They are reminders of life, suffering, and the enduring imprint of those who were once there. In every whisper, every fleeting shadow, and every cold draft, Forest Haven's past reaches forward, demanding acknowledgement and remembrance, ensuring that the stories of its residents are never entirely forgotten. Linda Vista Community Hospital, perched on a hill in Los Angeles, California, is a sprawling, decaying complex that has captured the fascination of urban explorers, filmmakers, and paranormal enthusiasts alike. Opened in the early 20th century, the hospital served as a bustling medical center for decades, providing care to thousands of patients in a variety of specialties. At its peak, it was a hub of activity, with busy wards, operating rooms, and hallways filled with nurses, doctors, and visitors. But as medical needs and funding priorities shifted, Linda Vista's doors closed in 1991, leaving behind a massive structure frozen in time. Today, it stands as a symbol of neglect, fascination, and lingering mystery, drawing those who are eager to explore both its physical decay and the stories whispered about its haunted corridors. The hospital's design reflects an era of institutional pride and ambition. Its long wings stretch out across the hilltop, windows lining corridors that once carried patients to therapy rooms, treatment areas, and surgical suites. The architecture, both functional and imposing, was meant to convey cleanliness, order, and authority. Patients arriving at Linda Vista would have been met with modern medical equipment for the time, orderly rooms, and staff trained to meet the challenges of hospital care. Yet, as the years passed, the building's idealized purpose began to collide with the reality of urban growth, funding shortages, and the pressures of a changing medical landscape. Linda Vista remained a functioning hospital for decades, but by the late 20th century, it had begun to show signs of strain. Maintenance was deferred, wards became outdated, and equipment grew old. The hospital's final years were marked by diminishing staff, slow responses to repairs, and an atmosphere that many described as increasingly oppressive. Though care continued, it was clear that the facility was aging past its usefulness. In 1991, the hospital was officially closed, leaving behind a vast, empty complex filled with medical equipment, furniture, and the remnants of everyday life that had been abruptly abandoned. Following its closure, there were several attempts to repurpose Linda Vista Community Hospital, including proposals to turn it into apartments, offices, or community spaces. Each initiative was stalled, however, leaving the hospital in a state of limbo. The empty corridors, broken windows, and decaying infrastructure became a magnet for photographers, urban explorers, and filmmakers. The hospital's cinematic presence grew as its eerie. Abandoned halls were used as settings for movies and television shows, each production adding another layer to the building's mystique. Yet beyond its visual appeal, Linda Vista gained a reputation for something far less tangible: the suggestion that the spirits of its former patients and staff refused to leave. Explorers entering Linda Vista today often describe a place that is alive with memory, despite its emptiness. Hallways stretch for hundreds of feet, filled with scattered debris, peeling paint, and abandoned furniture. Flickering lights are common, often appearing without electrical power or explanation, casting long, eerie shadows across walls and floors. Surgery rooms remain stocked with rusting metal tables, instruments left behind as if someone had walked away mid-procedure. These spaces, cold and silent, give a tangible sense of the hospital's former life and the suffering that occurred within its walls. Reports of paranormal activity have been frequent. Shadows move along hallways, often glimpsed from the corner of the eye, but vanishing when looked at directly. Some visitors claim to hear faint voices, whispers of conversation, calls for help, or indistinct murmurs coming from empty rooms. Footsteps are heard pacing corridors with no one present, and doors occasionally swing open or slam shut on their own. In some areas, particularly the old wards and surgical suites, explorers report sudden drops in temperature, creating an icy chill that seems almost physical. Many describe a sense of being watched, a constant, unnerving feeling that follows them as they move through the hospital's abandoned halls. Certain areas appear to concentrate the building's residual energy. The operating rooms are often described as oppressive, with explorers sensing the lingering presence of patients and medical staff. Rusted instruments, overturned chairs, and faded medical charts all add to the unsettling atmosphere, as though the memories of treatment, pain, and fear remain etched into the very surfaces. Dormitory wings, where patients once rested, are said to be particularly active at dusk, with shadowy forms pacing the floors or disappearing into walls. Even stairwells and basement corridors, dark and narrow, carry a heavy, almost suffocating energy, with unexplained sounds amplifying the sense of unease. The hospital grounds themselves contribute to the eerie reputation of Linda Vista. Overgrown gardens, cracked sidewalks, and broken fences create a visual sense of abandonment. At night, fog and darkness amplify the feeling that the site is alive with unseen presences. Visitors report glimpsing figures in upper windows, standing silently and watching, only to vanish when approached. Some have described hearing laughter or crying drifting across courtyards where no one walks. The combination of visual decay, residual energy, and the stories surrounding the hospital makes it a magnet for those drawn to the supernatural. Linda Vista's story is as much about the lives it touched as the buildings it left behind. Thousands of patients passed through its doors, some leaving recovered, many leaving permanently changed, and others dying within its walls. Staff worked tirelessly to care for the sick in an era before modern safety standards, often struggling to meet the needs of a growing patient population. Today, the hospital's empty rooms, broken equipment, and abandoned hallways serve as a tangible reminder of these lives. Every peeling wall, every flickering light, and every shadow in the corner is a testament to the history that continues to resonate within its walls. Even in abandonment, Linda Vista Community Hospital remains a place of stories of human struggle, of decay, and of lingering spirits. Explorers and visitors leave with the impression that the building itself remembers, that the energy of decades of patients and staff continues to inhabit its halls. Flickering lights, shadowy figures, and strange sounds are more than folklore. They are echoes of the hospital's past, preserving a memory that refuses to fade. In its empty wards, deserted surgical rooms, and darkened corridors, Linda Vista continues to be a site where history and the supernatural intertwine, a place where the living and the dead seem to coexist in uneasy proximity. For those who walk its abandoned halls today, Linda Vista is not merely a relic of medical history. It is a reminder that even in silence, the past can speak. Its walls hold stories of care, suffering, and unresolved presence, leaving visitors both fascinated and unsettled. The hospital may no longer treat the living, but in its shadows, whispers, and flickering lights, the spirits of the past remain, haunting the corridors and demanding that their stories not be forgotten. Yorktown Memorial Hospital, located in the small town of Yorktown, Texas, stands as a chilling relic of mid-20th century medicine. Built in 1951 and operated by the Felician Sisters of the Roman Catholic Church, it once represented hope and care for the sick and dying in the rural communities of southern Texas. The hospital's red brick exterior and cross-topped chapel gave it an air of devotion and solemnity, a place where faith and healing were meant to coexist. But decades after its closure, the building's halls echo not with prayers or patience, but with whispers, footsteps, and the restless energy of those who never truly left. In its early years, Yorktown Memorial Hospital was a modest yet bustling facility. With just over 100 beds, it served as a cornerstone of healthcare for the region. Patients came seeking treatment for everything from minor injuries to life-threatening illnesses, and many never left. The nuns who operated the hospital were known for their dedication, often tending to the sick day and night. They lived and worked in the same building, their routines marked by both compassion and exhaustion. The chapel inside the hospital provided solace for grieving families and for staff coping with the daily toll of death. But over time, the building would bear witness to far more suffering than salvation. By the 1980s, the hospital's role began to change. As modern medical facilities opened elsewhere, Yorktown's hospital transitioned into a rehabilitation center for drug and alcohol addiction. This new chapter brought its own challenges. The environment became tense and unpredictable. Patients in recovery often struggled through intense emotional and physical withdrawal, and the once orderly halls became places of turmoil. Reports of violence, despair, and even death grew. Staff turnover was high, and the facility began to lose its sense of stability. Eventually, after years of decline, Yorktown Memorial Hospital closed its doors for good, leaving behind a structure filled with medical equipment, furniture, and the lingering traces of those who had suffered within its walls. When the hospital was abandoned, much of it remained exactly as it had been left. Beds still stood in patient rooms, sheets yellowed with age, wheelchairs and gurneys sat in hallways coated with dust. The chapel's pews remained intact, and the statue of Christ still hung above the altar, eyes cast down in silent witness. The air inside is thick with humidity, the smell of rot and rust filling every corner. It's this haunting stillness, this frozen in time feeling that first drew explorers and paranormal investigators to the site. What they found there, however, went far beyond the decay of an old building. Visitors report that the temperature inside Yorktown Memorial Hospital can shift drastically without warning. Warm air gives way to sudden chills, especially in the basement and surgical wings. Many describe cold spots that seem to move, brushing past like unseen figures gliding through the corridors. Others claim to feel touches, gentle brushes against the arm, or a firm push on the shoulder when no one else is near. These sensations are often accompanied by a sense of being watched, as though dozens of unseen eyes are observing every step. The chapel, once a place of comfort, has become one of the hospital's most infamous locations. Those who enter describe an immediate heaviness, a feeling of sorrow that hangs in the air like a thick fog. Some claim to hear faint whispers in the pews, like prayers spoken in another language, or in the voices of long-departed nuns. Occasionally, visitors have reported seeing a shadowy figure near the altar believed by some to be the spirit of one of the sisters who once tended the sick. The crucifix on the wall has been said to tilt slightly on its own, and faint organ music has been heard, even though no instrument remains inside. The basement of Yorktown Memorial Hospital is equally unsettling. It is dark, damp, and lined with old storage rooms that once held medical supplies and records. Explorers report echoing footsteps that seem to follow them from room to room, the sound of doors creaking open in a distance, and low murmurs that stop when someone listens closely. Some visitors claim to have recorded electronic voice phenomena, muffled cries, whispers calling their names, or pleas for help. It is said that several deaths occurred in the basement during the hospital's years of operation, and the atmosphere there is often described as suffocating. Upstairs, the patient rooms are frozen reminders of the hospital's long, painful history. Beds remain in place, some still equipped with rusty metal headboards and thin, stained mattresses. On the walls, faded paint peels in long, curling strips, and broken ceiling tiles hang loosely above. Some visitors have reported seeing faint shadows moving across these rooms, while others have caught glimpses of figures standing at the ends of hallways, figures that disappear when approached. Voices have been heard here too, distant conversations, cries, or a single word whispered from nowhere. Cameras often malfunction inside the hospital, batteries draining in minutes, and strange distortions appear in photographs taken in certain rooms. Even outside, the energy seems to extend beyond the building itself. The grounds surrounding the hospital are overgrown, with twisted trees and cracked pavement leading up to the front entrance. Locals passing by at night report seeing faint lights in the windows, flickering like candle flames, though the building has no power. Some have claimed to see silhouettes in the upstairs windows, standing motionless and watching. On quiet nights, A faint echo of footsteps can sometimes be heard on the front steps, as if the hospital still waits for patients to arrive. Paranormal investigators who have studied Yorktown Memorial Hospital describe it as one of the most active haunted sites in Texas. They believe the combination of intense suffering, death, and religious devotion has imprinted itself on the building, creating an environment rich with residual energy. The spirits that linger are thought to be a mix of former patients, nuns, and even the souls of those who died during the facility's years as a rehabilitation center. Some claim the energy is not all benevolent. There are reports of growls, sudden aggression, and the feeling of being pushed or grabbed by unseen hands. Today, the hospital is privately owned but occasionally open for tours and investigations. Despite its crumbling walls and decaying infrastructure, it draws hundreds of visitors each year, each hoping to experience something unexplainable. Many leave convinced that Yorktown Memorial Hospital is alive with the echoes of its past, an unending cycle of pain, faith, and lingering spirit energy that refuses to fade. Yorktown Memorial Hospital stands as more than just an abandoned building. It is a vessel of memory. Every whisper, every cold spot, and every shadow speaks to the countless lives that pass through its halls. The silence that fills the air is not emptiness, but presence, a reminder that even after death, some places hold on to the living energy of those who once called them home. In the heart of Texas, beneath layers of dust and time, the hospital continues to breathe, quietly, hauntingly, and eternally. Southwest Detroit Hospital, once a proud symbol of medical progress and community service, now stands in eerie silence amid the crumbling remnants of Detroit's Corktown neighborhood. Its red brick walls, shattered windows, and weed-choked parking lots are all that remain of what was once a place of healing. Opened in the early 1970s, it was built with optimism and modern ideals, meant to serve a diverse and growing population. But decades of economic decline, corruption, and urban decay took their toll. The hospital closed in 1991, briefly reopened in 2006 under a new name, and soon after fell into abandonment once again. Today, the building sits as a hollow shell, steeped in shadows and whispered stories of those who never left. When it first opened, Southwest Detroit Hospital was hailed as a beacon of hope. It was one of the first hospitals in Michigan designed and staffed largely by African American medical professionals, standing as a symbol of equality and progress during a turbulent social era. Its halls once buzzed with activity. Nurses hurried between rooms, doctors made rounds, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. The facility boasted state-of-the-art technology for its time, offering emergency services, surgical wings, and maternity ward. For the community, it was not just a hospital, but a source of pride and representation. Yet, as the years passed, the optimism began to fade. The economic struggles of Detroit during the 1980s reached deep into its institutions, and Southwest Detroit Hospital was no exception. Funding became inconsistent, and maintenance began to slip. Paint peeled from the walls, equipment aged, and rumors of mismanagement and corruption began to circulate. The hospital's reputation suffered, and the once bustling corridors began to empty. By 1991, overwhelmed by debt and declining patient numbers, the hospital shut down for the first time, its wards left eerily silent. For years after the closure, the building remained dark, its windows broken by vandals and its hallways taken over by decay. But in 2006, a brief attempt was made to resurrect it under a new name, United Community Hospital. For a short time, there was life again inside the walls. Patients returned, staff were rehired, and lights flickered back on in rooms long dormant. However, the revival was short-lived. Financial difficulties and safety issues once again forced the hospital to close its doors, this time for good. When the lights went out the second time, they never came back on. Since then, the hospital has become one of Detroit's most notorious abandoned sites, a labyrinth of empty rooms, collapsed ceilings, and echoing corridors that seem to breathe on their own. The scent of mildew and rust hangs thick in the air, and the floors are littered with remnants of its former life. Patient files, broken gurneys, old signage, and surgical equipment left behind, as if time simply stopped. Yet beyond the decay, something else lingers. Those who venture inside often speak of strange sounds, cold drafts, and the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Ghost stories surrounding Southwest Detroit Hospital have grown steadily over the years. Many who have entered report hearing faint footsteps echoing through the halls. The steady rhythm of shoes against tiles, sometimes fast and purposeful, other times slow and dragging, as if someone were limping down a corridor unseen. Voices have been heard, as well, soft conversations just beyond earshot, or the unmistakable sound of someone calling a name that no one recognizes. Security guards, who once patrolled the property, claimed to hear doors slamming on upper floors even when they were alone, or to catch glimpses of movement in rooms where the windows are sealed shut. One of the most commonly reported apparitions is that of a doctor, seen wearing an old-fashioned white coat. Witnesses describe him as tall and serious, sometimes standing near what used to be the surgical wing, sometimes appearing in the stairwell or at the end of a hallway before vanishing into thin air. Some believe he may be the spirit of a physician who worked himself to exhaustion during the hospital's early years, perhaps dying suddenly on duty. Others think he is a manifestation of the hospital's collective energy, an echo of dedication that refuses to fade, even long after the patients and staff have gone. Another part of the hospital said to harbor strange activity is the basement, where old medical equipment and records were once stored. Those who have dared to descend describe the air as cold and heavy, filled with the faint metallic scent of rust and something else, something sour and unnatural. It is here that people most often hear voices, murmuring as if in distant conversation. A few have even reported the distinct sound of gurneys rolling across the concrete floor, though no wheels remain. Lights from flashlights sometimes flicker or die without warning, and photographs taken in the basement have captured strange mists or orbs of light that were not visible to the naked eye. The maternity ward also carries an unsettling energy. The cries of newborns once filled these rooms, but now only silence remains. Explorers claim to hear faint whimpers or lullabies, sung by an unseen voice, echoing faintly through the dark. Old bassinets and cribs sit abandoned in corners, draped in dust, as though waiting for infants who will never return. The sense of sadness here is palpable, as if the walls themselves have absorbed decades of loss and longing. Outside, the hospital grounds are just as haunting. The courtyard is overgrown, trees pushing their roots through cracked pavement. Windows gaped like open wounds, their shattered glass reflecting nothing but the gray Detroit sky. At night, the building looms like a silent sentinel over the surrounding neighborhood. Locals claim to see flickering lights inside when no power exists, or the silhouette of a figure moving past a window before disappearing. Some say that on quiet nights, the faint echo of footsteps can still be heard along the entranceway, as though doctors and nurses are still tending to patients in another time. Despite years of decay, Southwest Detroit Hospital continues to draw the curious and the brave. Urban explorers, ghost hunters, and filmmakers have all entered its darkened halls, searching for traces of the past. Many leave convinced that the hospital is more than just a building. It's a vessel of memory, holding on to the energy of every life that passed through its doors. Today, it stands as a grim monument to both the city's history and its haunting spirit. Its empty halls seem to breathe with the echoes of what once was. Conversations cut short, hurried footsteps, and the tireless efforts of those who sought to heal. Whether it's the spirit of a lost doctor, the memory of countless patients, or simply the energy of human struggle and perseverance, something remains within the walls of Southwest Detroit Hospital. Long after the lights went out and the last door was locked, the building continues to whisper in the dark its stories, carried by the restless echoes that drift through its decaying corridors. Lindy Boggs Medical Center, once known as Mercy Hospital, stands as one of New Orleans' most haunting reminders of tragedy and loss. Once a proud symbol of healing, compassion, and community, the hospital now looms in silence, a decaying monument to the devastation wrought by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. For decades, the building was a vital medical facility, They served the people of New Orleans with care and dedication. But after the storm, when the floodwaters rose and chaos engulfed the city, the hospital's lights went out for the last time. What remains today is a place trapped in time, dark, flooded, and heavy with the memories of those who never left. The hospital's history stretches back to the early 20th century, when it opened under the name Mercy Hospital. Operated by the Sisters of Mercy, it embodied the order's mission of compassion and care. Patients from across Louisiana came to its wards for treatment, surgery, and solace. Generations of doctors, nurses, and staff worked tirelessly within its walls, delivering babies, performing life-saving operations, and comforting the sick. The building itself was a testament to the optimism of modern medicine. Large windows, long corridors, and clean white wards filled with light and the steady rhythm of hospital life. As the years passed, the hospital grew, evolving with new wings, advanced equipment, and a reputation for excellence. By the late 20th century, it had become one of the most respected hospitals in New Orleans. Eventually renamed the Lindy Boggs Medical Center in honor of the city's beloved Congresswoman. For decades, it stood as a cornerstone of the community, a place where life began and ended, where pain and hope existed side by side. Then came August 2005. Hurricane Katrina descended on New Orleans with devastating force, bringing with it winds, torrential rain, and a storm surge that overwhelmed the city's levee system. As the floodwaters poured into neighborhoods, the hospital became a fortress of desperation. Power failed, backup generators sputtered and died. The once sterile halls grew stifling in the summer heat, and water began to seep into the lower floors. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to keep their patients alive, improvising in impossible conditions. They hand-ventilated patients, rationed supplies, and turned to candlelight when the emergency lights failed. When the floodwaters finally engulfed the area, the hospital was cut off from the outside world. Patients trapped on the upper floors cried out for help, while staff struggled to keep order. The smell of humidity, fear, and death filled the air. Days passed before rescue crews could reach them, and by the time evacuation was possible, it was too late for some. When the survivors finally left, they left everything behind: beds still made, equipment still humming on failing batteries, and personal belongings scattered in rooms now filling with water. When the waters receded, the hospital stood in ruin. The once bustling wards were now dark, silent, and slick with filth. Walls were warped by moisture, paint peeled in long strips, and mold spread across ceilings and floors. Rust consumed the fixtures, and shattered windows let in the thick Louisiana air. The smell of decay lingered. Medical charts floated in stagnant puddles, and surgical tools lay scattered on rusting trays. For years, no one returned. The building, untouched and forgotten, became a frozen echo of its final moments. Over time, the stories began. Locals who lived near the hospital claimed that at night, the building wasn't truly empty. Some said they could hear faint cries carried on the humid wind, pleas for help, soft and desperate, echoing through the darkened halls. Others claimed to see shadows moving behind the broken windows, flickering like candlelight or passing figures. Urban explorers who dared to enter spoke of the overwhelming sense of presence, like walking into a place that still remembered its purpose and its pain. Those who have ventured inside describe a place suspended between life and death. The corridors are damp and collapsing, filled with debris and the skeletal remains of medical equipment. Water still pools in some areas, creating mirror-like reflections that ripple with unseen movement. Explorers often report hearing footsteps in the flooded hallways, steady, deliberate, and coming from around the corner, though no one is there. Others describe voices, faint and indistinct, calling from rooms down the hall. Some say they hear the sound of gurney wheels squeaking across the tile, or the faint beep of machines that haven't worked in years. The operating rooms are among the most unnerving places in the building. The tables remain, draped in dust and mold, with old instruments still scattered across counters. Visitors claim that when they stand in these rooms, the air grows thick and cold, as though the space itself remembers the lives lost there. Shadows have been seen drifting along the walls, moving without light to cast them. A few have reported seeing a figure in surgical scrubs, sometimes standing at the edge of the room, sometimes leaning over an invisible patient before vanishing into thin air. The chapel, once a sanctuary for staff and patients seeking peace, now feels heavy with sorrow. The pews are warped, and the crucifix above the altar is tarnished and streaked with mold. Those who step inside often feel a profound stillness, as though the air itself holds its breath. Some report the faint sound of prayer or weeping coming from unseen corners, while others say they feel sudden chills, even on the hottest nights. Outside, the hospital grounds are overrun by weeds and vines, nature slowly reclaiming the space. Broken glass crunches underfoot, and the wind moves through the shattered windows with a hollow hum that sounds almost like a sigh. Locals say that sometimes, late at night, the upper floors glow, faintly small flashes of light that appear and vanish, as if flashlights or candles are being carried through the darkness. For many in New Orleans, Lindy Boggs Medical Center represents more than just an abandoned building. It's a scar, a place where the city's pain during Katrina is still alive. The ghosts said to inhabit its halls are not just spirits of the dead, but echoes of fear, struggle, and humanity. The cries heard in the night are reminders of those who suffered in its final days. And the shadows that move through the flooded corridors seem to replay moments of chaos and loss over and over again. Today, the hospital stands silent, a massive shell of concrete and steel, weathered by time and tragedy. The city has moved on, rebuilt, and healed in many ways. But within the walls of the old Lindy Boggs Medical Center, time has not passed. The smell of mildew and salt water still clings to the air. The flood stains still mark the walls. And when the night grows quiet and the wind moves through the hollow halls, the building seems to whisper, to remember what happened, and to ensure that no one ever forgets. The Knox County Infirmary in Ohio stands as a monument to a darker, quieter history, a building that has seen more than a century of human suffering, isolation, and decay. Built in 1877, it began as a combination poorhouse, infirmary, and mental asylum, designed to house those society had forgotten, the destitute, the sick, and the mentally ill. Its stone walls were meant to provide shelter, but over the years, they absorbed pain, despair, and the echoes of countless lost souls. Today, the building stands mostly abandoned, its shell crumbling under the weight of time. Yet even now, whispers of its past drift through the corridors, and those who dare to step inside swear the dead have never truly left. When it first opened, the Knox County Infirmary was considered a symbol of progress and compassion. Local officials believed it would bring order to the care of the poor and the insane, who until then were often left to fend for themselves. The building was large, built in the grand institutional style of the era, high ceilings, tall windows, a bell tower, and long hallways that stretched in both directions like endless veins through stone. It sat on rolling farmland, surrounded by fields that patients and residents were expected to work as part of their therapy. The infirmary was a world unto itself, with its own gardens, livestock, and even a small cemetery tucked behind the property for those who died there without family to claim them. Inside, life was bleak but structured. The poor and homeless were assigned chores in exchange for food and shelter. The sick were treated as best as the staff could manage, with limited medicine and crude equipment. Those with mental illness were often restrained, kept in small, cold rooms that echoed with cries of confusion and pain. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the stench of sickness, forming a scent that never truly left the building. Doctors made rounds with primitive instruments, while nurses tried to bring order to chaos. As the decades passed, the world changed, but the Knox County Infirmary seemed frozen in time. Conditions deteriorated. Paint peeled, roofs leaked, and the cries of patients became a nightly chorus. Staff came and went, many reporting unease in certain parts of the building, especially near the old bell tower. Some said they heard footsteps pacing above them late at night when no one was supposed to be there. Others swore they saw a figure moving past the tower's narrow windows, only to find it empty when they checked. By the early 20th century, the infirmary had earned a grim reputation. Fires broke out more than once, spreading smoke and fear through the wards. Illness swept through the halls: tuberculosis, influenza, and pneumonia, claiming dozens of lives at a time. The small graveyard behind the building grew crowded. Some said that on quiet nights, you could hear soft weeping from that direction, the sound of forgotten souls mourning their own graves. Eventually, the building was repurposed several times. It served as a nursing home for a while, then briefly as a county facility for the mentally ill. But each new use seemed to carry the same dark fate. Staff complained of strange happenings: doors opening and closing on their own, lights flickering even when the power was off, and the unmistakable scent of medicine drifting through the halls long after the pharmacy wing had been abandoned. When the facility finally closed for good, the structure was left to rot. Vandals and urban explorers began to sneak inside, drawn by the building's haunting appearance and grim history. They found rusted hospital beds still in their rooms, medical cabinets filled with dust-covered bottles, and patient records scattered across the floors. Graffiti covered the once sterile walls, and the wind howled through broken windows like a mournful voice. Those who explored the building rarely left unchanged. Many reported feeling watched from the moment they stepped through the doors. The air inside felt heavy, thick with moisture, and something else, something unseen. In the basement, where old boilers and storage rooms lay in ruin, people often heard the sound of footsteps following them, slow and deliberate. Shadows moved against the walls even when their flashlights were steady. One explorer described hearing the faint ring of the bell from the tower above, though the mechanism had long since rusted solid. The bell tower itself has become the focal point of many ghost stories. Some claim that during the infirmary's final years, a patient escaped confinement and climbed to the tower, where he took his own life. Since then, people say that his spirit lingers there, pacing near the windows. On moonlit nights, figures have been seen standing in the tower's archways, only to vanish when approached. Others say they've seen the faint glow of a lantern moving up the spiral staircase, as if a caretaker from long ago is still making nightly rounds. Inside the wards, the atmosphere is oppressive. The air smells faintly of rust, mold, and something medicinal, a scent that has no logical source, as though the building itself is exhaling the ghosts of old treatments. Visitors have reported hearing the metallic clink of medical instruments, the faint rustle of bedsheets, and the distant murmur of voices coming from empty rooms. In the old infirmary wing, shadows move independently of light, and cold spots appear suddenly, making the skin prickle. Some explorers claim to have captured whispering voices on their recorders, soft and indistinct, but unmistakably human pleas for help, or quiet prayers for release. The old cemetery remains behind the building, its headstones worn and tilting, many unmarked. It's said that the ground there feels unnaturally cold, even in summer. Locals visiting the site have reported seeing faint lights hovering among the graves, flickering like candles in the wind. Some claim that if you linger too long, you can hear footsteps approaching through the grass, slow, dragging, deliberate only, to find no one there when you turn. Time has done little to erase the scars of the Knox County Infirmary. The walls are cracked, the floors uneven, but the atmosphere remains charged with emotion. It's as if every cry, every sigh, every whispered prayer that once filled the building has been absorbed into the stone. Even after years of neglect, the place feels alive in a way that defies explanation. For those who believe in ghosts, the infirmary is a place where the veil between life and death is thin. The spirits of the poor, the sick, and the forgotten seem to wander its halls still, bound to the place that was their final refuge. For others, it's simply a building, relic of an era when compassion and cruelty often lived side by side. But whether one believes or not, there's no denying the feeling that settles over anyone who walks through the decaying corridors of the Knox County Infirmary. It is the weight of history, the echo of suffering, and the silence of the forgotten. And somewhere above, in the shadow of the old bell tower, something unseen still moves, watching, waiting, reminding all who visit that some places never truly die. Rolling Hills Asylum in East Bethany, New York, sits quietly among open fields. its crumbling brick walls and sagging roof lines bearing witness to more than a century of sorrow. Once known as the Genesee County Poor Farm, it was built in 1827 to house the destitute, the sick, and the unwanted people society preferred to forget. For decades, it sheltered paupers, criminals, the mentally ill, and the physically disabled under the same roof. Over time, the building developed a reputation not just for its history of hardship, but for the strange and inexplicable occurrences that still seem to echo through its abandoned corridors. Among those who visit today, ghost hunters, urban explorers, or curious travelers rolling hills. Asylum is most famous for one terrifying place: the shadow hallway. This dim, narrow passage is said to be the heart of the asylum's paranormal energy, where dark figures drift. Along the walls, voices whisper in the dark, and orbs of light appear out of thin air before fading into nothing. Those who enter rarely leave without feeling as if they've brushed against something beyond understanding. When the asylum first opened, it was meant to be a place of refuge, but life inside was far from gentle. The poor farm was self-sufficient, with residents expected to work for their keep. There were barns, workshops, and fields, all maintained by the residents themselves. The building had a morgue in its basement and a small cemetery not far from its grounds, necessary since many who arrived never left alive. Records indicate hundreds, perhaps even over 1,000, souls were buried there in unmarked graves. Walking through the asylum now, it's easy to imagine how it once was. The floors creak underfoot, the air is thick with dust, and the smell of old plaster and rust lingers in every room. Faded paint peels from the walls, curling like the pages of an ancient book. There are remnants of lives once lived here. Broken bed frames, discarded wheelchairs, and hospital gurneys left to decay. The silence is deceptive. At any moment, a whisper might rise from nowhere, a sigh, a moan, or the faint echo of footsteps that do not belong to the living. The shadow hallway earned its name from the countless reports of dark apparitions seen moving within it. Visitors describe tall, human-like shadows gliding silently across the walls, sometimes stopping abruptly as if staring back. Others have seen the silhouette of a man who stands motionless in the center of the corridor before fading into the darkness. Paranormal investigators often bring cameras, night vision gear, and EVP recorders, hoping to capture evidence. Many leave with more questions than answers. Their recordings play back low, indecipherable murmurs, or a single, chilling phrase whispered directly into the microphone. Get out. One of the most commonly reported entities is known as the Shadow Man. Witnesses describe him as enormous, at least 7 feet tall, his form completely black, with no discernible features. Some believe he was once a patient or a worker. Others think he's something else entirely, something older than the asylum itself. He's often seen near the end of the shadow hallway, where the light from flashlights seems to dim inexplicably. People who encounter him describe a sudden pressure in the chest, a rush of cold air, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched by something intelligent and aware. Beyond the hallway, the asylum's other rooms have their own share of strange activity. The old infirmary is known for soft crying and the clatter of unseen objects. In the morgue, the metal drawers where bodies were once kept emit sudden bangs, though no one touches them. The chapel, long abandoned, is often filled with the faint sound of hymn voices singing in unison from no visible source. Orbs of light appear in photographs taken in total darkness, drifting and glowing as though alive. Former staff and caretakers who've worked on the building's preservation have their own stories. One woman recalled walking through the old men's ward alone late one evening. As she passed the shadow hallway, she heard the sound of shuffling feet behind her. Thinking someone had entered, she turned, but the hall was empty. Yet the footsteps continued, following her all the way to the end of the corridor, pausing when she paused. She said she could feel the temperature drop sharply around her, her breath visible in the air before she fled the building in fear. Some believe that the haunting stemmed from the deep emotional energy imprinted by years of human suffering. Rolling Hills was not just a poorhouse. It was also a place where many were abandoned by family, left to fade away in obscurity. Mental illness was poorly understood, and treatments were often cruel. Patients were restrained for long periods, and some died alone in their rooms. Many bodies were buried without ceremony. It's said that these souls never found peace, their despair lingering like a stain that cannot be erased. Local legends tell of one resident known only as Roy. He was said to be a gentle giant standing over 7 feet tall, born with a severe genetic condition that left him disfigured. Roy lived at Rolling Hills for decades until his death in the 1940s. Visitors claim his spirit still walks the halls, a massive shadow moving silently through the dark. Unlike the terrifying Shadow Man, Roy's presence is said to be calm, protective even. Sometimes, investigators leave small toys or balls in the hallway, only to find them moved later, as if by unseen hands. Yet not every spirit within Rolling Hills is kind. There are reports of growls echoing from empty rooms, doors slamming without warning, and sudden bursts of static that make recording devices malfunction. One investigator described feeling an invisible hand grip his shoulder so tightly he could feel individual fingers pressing into his skin. Another fainted after hearing a scream right beside his ear, though no one was near him. Even the exterior of the asylum exudes unease. The windows, broken and dark, seem to watch from every angle. Some who drive past at night claim to see faces peering out from the upper floors, pale, expressionless faces illuminated by moonlight. Others have seen flickers of movement behind the glass, though the building has been locked and empty for years. Byberry State Hospital, officially known as Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry, sits on the edge of northeast Philadelphia as a testament to a history steeped in tragedy, neglect, and whispered horrors. Opened in 1907, the hospital was intended to be a modern facility for the mentally ill, a place of care and rehabilitation. Its sprawling campus, with multiple buildings, underground tunnels, and extensive grounds, was designed to house thousands of patients. Yet behind its imposing brick walls and manicured lawns lay a darker reality. Overcrowding, abuse, and neglect became the norm rather than the exception. By the time the hospital closed in 1990, it had earned a reputation as one of the most infamous mental institutions in the United States, and the echoes of its tortured past continue to haunt its empty halls to this day. When Byberry first opened, it was heralded as a state-of-the-art facility, meant to provide humane treatment to those suffering from mental illness. Patients were housed in multiple buildings across the campus, with some wards accommodating hundreds at a time. Early on, treatments included hydrotherapy, electroshock, and other experimental procedures, all considered cutting-edge at the time. But as the decades passed, overcrowding and insufficient funding turned the hospital into a pressure cooker of despair. Staff shortages were constant, and the quality of care declined. Patients were often left in squalid conditions, tied to beds for days, and subjected to neglect and mistreatment. The hospital's underground tunnels are among the most chilling aspects of Byberry, originally designed to connect buildings for staff and maintenance. These tunnels became the setting for countless rumors. Patients were sometimes transported through these dark passages, and stories persist of screams echoing endlessly through the concrete corridors, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the suffering. Visitors and urban explorers who enter the tunnels today report hearing faint cries and moans, indistinguishable from human, yet carrying a resonance that feels unnatural, almost otherworldly. Even during daylight, the tunnels exude an oppressive, suffocating atmosphere, as if the air itself remembers the torment it once contained. The hospital's wards are equally unsettling. Rows of empty beds sit in decaying rooms, the floors littered with remnants of a bygone era, rusted wheelchairs, scattered medical charts, and broken furniture. Paint peels from the walls in curling strips, revealing decades of neglect beneath. Explorers often report hearing faint whispers, indistinct voices calling from corners, or even human-like howls that seem to come from nowhere. The sounds are rarely consistent, sometimes soft, sometimes horrifyingly loud, and impossible to locate. Some claim that the cries are echoes of former patients, trapped in the hospital's dark history, forced to relive their suffering long after death. Among the most notorious areas is the old administration building, where the treatment records and patient files were once kept. Today, it is a hollow shell of shattered windows, collapsing floors, and exposed beams. People report hearing doors slam violently, even when the hallways are empty. Footsteps can be heard pacing the floors above, yet no one is present. At night, some have claimed to see shadowy figures standing silently in doorways, vanishing the moment they are approached. Paranormal investigators often report that their equipment malfunctions in these areas. Cameras die, flashlights flicker, and recording devices capture static or distorted voices. The outdoor grounds are no less eerie. Weeds and wild grasses have overtaken the once maintained lawns, and the buildings themselves loom like crumbling fortresses. The wind whistles through broken windows and gaps in the roof, creating a hollow, mournful sound that blends with the distant hum of city traffic. Some claim that on still nights, the echoes of long-forgotten screams drift across the fields, carried on the wind from the hospital's underground chambers. Trees twist in unnatural shapes, casting strange shadows across the abandoned courtyards, and local legend holds that the grounds themselves retain a memory of the suffering that occurred there. Former staff members have shared their own accounts of Byberry's haunted nature. Some reported unexplained cold spots, the feeling of being watched in empty rooms, or sudden, unprovoked panic that overcame them while walking the halls. Others spoke of shadows moving independently of light, or the unmistakable sensation of human presence in areas where no one else should be. The hospital's basement and laundry areas, in particular, were often described as unbearably oppressive, as if the building itself were exhaling decades of sorrow and anger. One particularly chilling story involves the so-called screaming room, a section of the hospital where patients with severe mental disorders were sometimes confined. Though many of the rooms have collapsed or been sealed, the memory of them lingers. Visitors describe hearing piercing, heart-wrenching screams that echo through the empty halls, forcing them to flee before investigating. The sound is said to be disorienting, bouncing off walls and floors in a way that makes it impossible to locate the source, leaving only fear and confusion in its wake. Byberry's reputation also extends to reports of shadowy figures seen at the windows of upper floors. They appear fleetingly, often at dusk, as dark shapes silhouetted against the remaining glass panes. Some explorers have claimed to see entire figures pacing in the distance, only to vanish when approached. Others describe orbs of light floating silently through decayed rooms, their movement deliberate, almost intelligent. As if the building's past inhabitants are still moving among the walls. Despite its notoriety, Byberry State Hospital remains largely untouched today. It is privately owned, and access is restricted, yet stories of its paranormal activity persist. Urban legends, eyewitness accounts, and the reports of investigators have cemented its reputation as one of Pennsylvania's most haunted sites. Those who enter rarely leave unaffected, claiming that the echoes of human suffering linger in ways that can be felt, heard, and even seen. Walking through Byberry today is like stepping into a time capsule of pain and despair. The walls are crumbling, floors sag underfoot, and shadows cling to corners in the dim light. Yet the real presence is not in the decay itself, it is in the energy that permeates every hallway, every abandoned ward, and every tunnel. Here, the cries of the past refuse to be silenced, and the spirits of the forgotten seem to roam freely, ensuring that Byberry's dark legacy is neither hidden nor forgotten. Even after decades of abandonment, Byberry State Hospital is not merely an empty building. It is a vessel of memory, horror, and restless energy, a place where human suffering has been etched into brick and mortar, echoing through time. The screams in its tunnels, the cries in empty wards, and the human-like howls from its depths are more than stories. They are reminders that some places, burdened with sorrow and neglect, continue to live in a world of shadows, waiting for anyone who dares to witness the remnants of their haunted past. Terrell State Hospital, located just east of Dallas in Terrell, Texas, is a sprawling complex with a history as dark and complex as the echoes that still linger in its abandoned corridors. Opened in 1885, it was originally designed to provide care for those suffering from mental illness, a time when understanding and treatment were rudimentary at best. Over the decades, the hospital expanded into a massive campus of brick and stone buildings, some of which are now left to decay, serving as silent witnesses to decades of suffering, neglect, and lingering human energy. Today, visitors report that the old buildings, though crumbling and overgrown, are far from empty. Dark silhouettes, sudden chills, and the faint sound of voices echo through these abandoned wings, creating an atmosphere that many describe as unsettling, even terrifying. When Terrell State Hospital first opened, it was seen as a model for progressive care in Texas. Patients were admitted for a range of mental health conditions, from severe depression and schizophrenia to developmental disorders and epilepsy. Staff members included doctors, nurses, and attendants who often worked long hours under strenuous conditions, trying to provide care in a time when psychiatric medicine was in its infancy. The hospital was largely self-contained, with its own laundry, kitchens, and farms where patients were expected to work as part of therapy. The campus itself grew over the years, with wards added to accommodate increasing patient populations, as well as administrative buildings, recreational areas, and treatment facilities. However, the hospital's history is marked by overcrowding and neglect. By the mid-20th century, thousands of patients were confined within its walls, and resources were stretched thin. Reports of mistreatment and questionable practices were not uncommon, and the atmosphere within the wards could often be tense and chaotic. Patients who became unmanageable were sometimes restrained for long periods, and the cries and shouts of frustration, fear, and despair became an ever-present part of the environment. It is this accumulation of suffering over decades that many believe has left a lasting imprint on the buildings themselves. As the years passed, several of the hospital's older buildings were gradually abandoned. Some were left as is, frozen in a state of decay, with peeling paint, broken windows, and collapsed ceilings. Others were eventually demolished, though the grounds remain a haunting reminder of what once stood there. Those who venture into these abandoned structures today often report a palpable sense of unease, as if the energy of past patients still lingers, refusing to be forgotten. Visitors frequently describe seeing dark silhouettes moving through the hall's shapes that appear human in form but vanish when approached. Some have reported glimpsing a figure standing at the end of a long corridor, only to turn and find the space completely empty. Others claim that these shadows move independently, sometimes darting across rooms or lingering just beyond the edges of their vision. The effect is disorienting, as though the building itself is alive, shifting and watching. The temperature within the abandoned buildings is another strange phenomenon. Witnesses often speak of sudden chills, cold spots that appear without warning, and icy drafts that brush against the skin even on warm Texas days. Some describe the sensation of being touched by an unseen presence, like brushes against the arm or shoulder that cannot be explained. These experiences are often accompanied by a sense of being watched, an oppressive awareness that extends beyond mere imagination. Sound is another element of the hospital's haunting reputation. Explorers report echoes of footsteps, even when they are alone in the buildings. Sometimes the footsteps seem to move through rooms above or behind them, making it impossible to determine their origin. Voices, low murmurs, cries, or faint laughter have been heard drifting through abandoned wards. In some cases, the recordings made by paranormal investigators have captured distorted whispers, unintelligible speech, or sudden bursts of static that coincide with the perceived presence of unseen entities. Certain areas of the hospital are noted for particularly intense activity. The old patient wards, with rows of empty beds and peeling walls, are a frequent source of reports. Some say they can hear the sounds of someone moving among the beds, pacing or shifting objects that remain long after the hospital's closure. Storage rooms, where medical equipment and supplies once stood, are described as cold, oppressive, and heavy with energy. Explorers often leave these areas quickly, feeling a suffocating weight, as though the building itself is pressing down upon them. The outdoor grounds surrounding the hospital carry their own eerie energy. Overgrown lawns and cracked pathways lead to buildings whose windows appear like hollow eyes, staring silently at anyone who approaches. At dusk, The setting sun casts long shadows across the campus, blending with the silhouettes that seem to inhabit the abandoned structures. Some visitors have reported hearing distant voices, faint sobbing, or even the sound of children laughing, though no one is present. Local legends suggest that the lingering presence within Terrell State Hospital is tied to both the suffering endured there and the sheer number of lives that passed through its doors. Thousands of patients spent months, years, or even decades confined within its walls. For many, death came within the hospital itself, often unnoticed and unremarked upon. It is said that the echoes of these lives, fear, pain, and longing remain etched into the very fabric of the buildings, giving the abandoned wings their reputation for supernatural activity. Despite the hospital's notoriety, the site continues to attract urban explorers, historians, and paranormal enthusiasts. Many approach with cameras, flashlights, and recording devices, hoping to capture some sign of what is said to inhabit the buildings, while most leave without definitive evidence. Nearly all report experiences they cannot explain: shadows out of place, footsteps echoing from nowhere, sudden chills, and the feeling of eyes following them through empty corridors. Terrell State Hospital remains a place where history and hauntings intersect. Its abandoned buildings are more than remnants of architectural decay. They are vessels of memory and energy, holding the experiences of countless lives lived and lost within its walls. Those who step inside often leave with a lingering sense that they have walked among spirits, caught fleeting glimpses of figures that never left, and heard the echoes of a past that refuses to remain silent. Even today, long after the hospital's patients have moved on and the buildings are falling into ruin, Terrell State Hospital continues to whisper its stories. In the darkened halls, in the abandoned wards, and beneath the shadowed rooflines, something unseen watches, moves, and waits, reminding all who enter that the past never truly dies, and some places never forget. J.B. Thomas Hospital in Peabody, Massachusetts, is a building frozen in time, a relic of modern medicine, abandoned abruptly and left to decay. Closed in 2013, the facility once served as a hub of care for the local community, providing emergency treatment, surgeries, and specialized services to thousands of patients over decades. Today, it stands largely untouched, yet it's sterile. Cold corridors evoke a sense of eerie familiarity, as though the staff and patients simply vanished mid-shift, leaving operating rooms, wards, and offices suspended in a moment that refuses to end. Visitors describe it as hauntingly cinematic, often comparing it to a post-apocalyptic movie set, where every detail tells a story of life interrupted and decay taking over. Walking through J.B. Thomas Hospital, it's impossible not to notice the strange stillness that fills the air. The floors are cracked and dusty, with peeling paint curling down the walls. Broken ceiling panels hang precariously, and water stains mark the corridors where pipes have long since leaked. Biohazard waste containers, once carefully managed, sit abandoned. Warning labels fading, but still legible, a ghostly reminder of a place designed to fight disease and injury. Surgical lights remain suspended over empty operating tables, as though the surgeons stepped out for a moment and never returned. Equipment, from gurneys to monitors, remains scattered across the rooms, covered in dust, rust, and grime, suggesting a scene abruptly abandoned rather than simply closed. The wards themselves tell a similar story. Patient beds are left in rows, some still holding linens that have yellowed with time. Wheelchairs and walkers lean against walls, waiting for occupants who will never return. In some rooms, medical charts and paperwork are scattered across desks and floors, as if staff had been pulled away mid-shift. The lingering scent of antiseptic, faint yet persistent, mixes with the mold and decay of years without maintenance, creating a smell that is both clinical and unsettling. Those who explore the building often remark that it feels like walking through someone's memories, intensely personal yet universally eerie. Urban explorers are drawn to J.B. Thomas Hospital for its haunting aesthetic and the stories it seems to tell. Many describe it as cinematic, a stage set for a horror film or a post-apocalyptic drama. The lighting is naturally dim, with sunlight filtering through broken windows and shafts that highlight dust motes dancing in the air. Shadows stretch across floors and walls, creating the illusion of movement even when no one is present. The combination of abandoned medical equipment, decaying infrastructure, and eerie silence makes the building feel alive in the most unsettling way, like it is still functioning in some parallel dimension, preserving the energy of every patient and staff member who once walked its halls. Echoes of the past seem to linger in unexpected ways. Some visitors report the faint hum of machinery, though all power has long been disconnected. Footsteps echo in empty corridors, often sounding as if they come from above or behind. Yet, when turned to investigate, nothing is there. Doors occasionally creak open or slam shut without warning. And shadows sometimes appear at the edges of vision, shapes that vanish when approached but leave an unsettling sense of awareness. A single light bulb may flicker in a deserted hallway, illuminating a wall of peeling paint or a toppled gurney, heightening the impression that the building remembers more than it should. The operating rooms are among the most unnerving spaces within J.B. Thomas Hospital. Monitors lie dormant, surgical tables are stained with time, and overhead lights hang in frozen positions, creating the impression that a procedure was interrupted and never resumed. Scrub sinks remain untouched, with faucets still affixed to walls, dripping in slow, rhythmic time with the imagination of visitors. It is in these rooms that many explorers report feeling the heaviest presence, as if the building itself is aware of the weight of life and death that once unfolded there. The sterile smell, mixed with mildew and decay, amplifies the impression that this was a place of urgency and tension, now abandoned to silence. Biohazard and waste storage areas add another layer of unease. Containers once carefully organized now sit tilted or toppled, their labels warning of infectious materials, chemicals, or hazardous substances. Some visitors report that these rooms are inexplicably cold, with an unnatural chill that bites through clothing. Others speak of feeling watched, or the sensation of unseen movement in the corners of the room. The contrast between the sterile purpose of the hospital and the chaotic disorder of abandonment creates a psychological tension that few can ignore. Even the administrative offices hold their own haunting presence. Patient files, appointment sheets, and medical records lie scattered across desks and floors, some intact, some deteriorating. Phones, fax machines, and computers remain as if waiting to be used again, their silence louder than any noise. Some visitors have claimed to hear faint typing sounds, the whisper of paper shuffling, or low murmurs echoing down empty hallways, adding to the impression that the hospital's energy has not entirely dissipated. The hallways, long and dimly lit, are perhaps the most striking feature. Broken windows cast light that stretches across floors in irregular patterns, while shadows move along walls in ways that seem almost deliberate. Cold drafts sweep unexpectedly through the corridors, producing goosebumps even on warm days. Footsteps, light, deliberate, and sometimes multiple, have been reported by explorers even when they are completely alone. Voices, sometimes indistinct whispers, sometimes the faint echo of a nurse calling a patient's name, appear in sudden bursts, only to fade into silence moments later. J.B. Thomas Hospital stands today as a place where past and present collide. The buildings, though decaying, still convey the urgency and intensity of hospital life, the care, the stress, the fear, and the hope that filled every room. Visitors and urban explorers alike often report leaving with a sense of unease, not from overt danger, but from the palpable presence of the countless lives that once animated the facility. The hospital is a frozen moment in time, a world where the lights turned off abruptly and the echoes of life continue to linger. Even now, more than a decade after its closure, J.B. Thomas Hospital remains a magnet for those drawn to the intersection of history, decay, and the unexplained. It is a place where operating rooms, wards, and offices exist as remnants of human endeavor, suspended between memory and oblivion. Walking through its hallways, one cannot help but feel that though the hospital is silent, it is not empty its stories, its energy, and its lingering presence still inhabit every corridor, every room, and every shadow. Utica Psychiatric Center, located in central New York, stands as one of the oldest mental health institutions in the United States. A sprawling complex whose walls have borne witness to nearly 2 centuries of human suffering, treatment, and despair. Opening its doors in 1843, the center was among the first in the country to attempt more structured care for those with mental illness. Yet it quickly became apparent that understanding and compassion were limited by the medical knowledge and social attitudes of the era. Over the decades, wings were added to accommodate the growing patient population, and the hospital became a self-contained world of wards, treatment rooms, administrative offices, and service buildings. Today, some of these wings lie abandoned, their decay leaving behind a haunting testament to the center's long and troubled history. Visitors, urban explorers, and paranormal enthusiasts alike speak of cries echoing through hallways, dark shadows moving at the edges of vision, and an oppressive atmosphere that seems to seep from the very walls. From the moment it opened, Utica Psychiatric Center was a place of paradoxes. It promised treatment and rehabilitation, yet patients were often subjected to harsh, experimental, or simply misguided medical practices. In the mid-19th century, therapies included isolation, mechanical restraints, and cold water treatments, intended to calm or correct mental disorders. Later, electroshock therapy, seclusion rooms, and other controversial interventions became part of daily life. Overcrowding became a chronic issue, and while staff strove to provide care, the sheer volume of patients made individual attention nearly impossible. The halls echoed with the cries of frustration, fear, and despair, a sound that some believe has never fully left the building. The abandoned wings of Utica Psychiatric Center are particularly chilling. These areas, once bustling with activity, now lie in silence, their walls peeling, floors cracked, and ceilings sagging. The air is thick with dust, the faint smell of mildew, and the lingering scent of old antiseptics. Broken furniture, rusted beds, and scattered medical equipment create an atmosphere of desolation. Visitors often describe the experience as walking into a world where time stopped, as though the rooms themselves are suspended in a permanent state of neglect and decay. Many reports of paranormal activity are centered around these abandoned sections. Shadowy figures are frequently glimpsed out of the corner of one's eye, vanishing when directly observed. Some explorers have described seeing a tall figure standing at the end of a hallway, its form indistinct, yet unmistakably human. Others report fleeting images of patients sitting in empty rooms, rocking chairs, moving slightly as if guided by invisible hands. These apparitions are sometimes accompanied by sudden cold spots, a rush of icy air that seems to materialize from nowhere, making the skin prickle and raising goosebumps. Cries and murmurs are another hallmark of Utica's haunted reputation. Visitors have reported faint sobbing drifting down long hallways, whispers emanating from empty rooms, and occasional bursts of loud, anguished screaming that echo through abandoned wards. These sounds seem to have no identifiable source, and many describe them as coming from multiple directions at once, creating a disorienting effect. Some believe that these cries are the echoes of patients who suffered and died within the hospital, their anguish imprinted on the architecture itself. Treatment rooms, especially those left untouched, hold a particular kind of oppressive atmosphere. Operating tables, restraint chairs, and old diagnostic equipment remain, often covered in dust but still recognizable. Stepping into these rooms, visitors report a weight pressing down on the chest, a feeling of heaviness that seems to linger and intensify the longer one remains. It is as if the energy of decades of treatments, both well-intentioned and cruel, has been absorbed by the walls, refusing to dissipate even as the patients themselves are long gone. Footsteps are another common occurrence in the abandoned wings. Explorers often report hearing them echo across hallways, sometimes approaching from behind or above, only to vanish when they turn. Doors swing open or close on their own, sometimes with a loud slam, other times barely moving but enough to catch attention. Lights flicker inexplicably in areas without power, and some visitors have described the sensation of being followed, watched, or even gently touched by something unseen. These experiences contribute to an overall sense that the building itself is alive, or at least responsive, carrying with it the memories of its past inhabitants. The center's original wards, now partially sealed or abandoned, are particularly evocative. Long rows of beds remain, often rusting or overturned, with sheets and remnants of hospital linens decaying into dust. Some rooms are completely empty, yet explorers report that the sound of shifting furniture or faint whispers seems to come from within. Windows, many broken or boarded up, cast long shadows that stretch across the floors, creating an illusion of movement even when none exists. The interplay of light, shadow, and decay gives the hospital a surreal quality, one that enhances both fear and fascination. Despite its age, Utica Psychiatric Center is still in partial operation, with certain wings functioning for modern treatment. Yet the abandoned areas are increasingly the focus of attention. Urban explorers, historians, and paranormal investigators are drawn to these spaces, hoping to experience or document the phenomena reported for decades. Photographs often capture strange lights or orbs, and electronic recording devices frequently pick up unexplained sounds or distorted voices. Many who venture inside describe a lingering sense of sadness, a feeling that the building remembers every patient, every scream, every moment of fear and despair. Walking through Utica Psychiatric Center today is like stepping into a place where history and memory collide. The walls, corridors, and rooms hold stories that are both visible and invisible. The legacy of medical care, human suffering, and lives lived in isolation. Shadowy figures, sudden chills, and the cries that echo through empty wards are not just remnants of the past. They are reminders that some spaces retain the energy of those who once inhabited them, refusing to fade quietly into history. Even in its current state of partial abandonment, the center continues to draw attention, a monument to the complexities of mental health care in America and the shadows it has cast. For those who dare to explore its halls, Utica Psychiatric Center is more than a building. It is a living memory, haunted by both the past and the enduring presence of those who were never fully forgotten. The cries, the shadows, and the oppressive atmosphere serve as constant reminders that some places, heavy with history and pain, never truly let go. Roosevelt Island, Smallpox Hospital, perched on the edge of the East River in New York City, is a decaying Gothic ruin that carries the weight of a dark and haunting history. Built in 1856, the hospital was designed to treat patients suffering from smallpox and other infectious diseases during a time when epidemics were feared and often fatal. Its remote location on what was then known as Blackwell's Island was intentional, meant to isolate the sick from the bustling city. The hospital's grand, castellated stone walls and pointed arches were intended to provide both a functional and imposing presence, signaling both authority and care. But over the years, as treatments failed and patients succumbed to illness, the building became a symbol of suffering, isolation, and death. Today, the abandoned structure is a ghostly reminder of that era, a ruin where visitors report spectral forms moving through the broken halls, shadows that seem almost human, and an atmosphere thick with lingering despair. The hospital's history is inseparable from the horrors of smallpox itself. In the mid-19th century, smallpox was one of the most feared diseases in the world, often leaving survivors scarred or permanently disabled. Patients were brought to Roosevelt Island under strict quarantine, confined to its wards for weeks at a time, separated from family and the outside world. The treatments of the era were rudimentary and sometimes brutal. Isolation, enforced rest, and rudimentary medical care. Many patients died alone in their beds, and the dead were carried through the hospital's corridors and out to graves on the island, sometimes without ceremony. The knowledge of these countless deaths permeates the atmosphere of the site even today. The building itself is now largely a shell, its once imposing towers crumbling, windows shattered or missing entirely. Portions of the hospital stand roofless, while others are partially walled, with jagged openings allowing the wind to whistle through its hollow corridors. The Gothic architecture, arches, buttresses, and stone spires adds a sense of drama to the decay, making the ruins seem simultaneously majestic and threatening. Visitors often describe the halls as cold and oppressive, the air carrying a weight that seems to press down on those who step inside. Reports of paranormal activity have followed the site for decades. Explorers and ghost hunters frequently speak of spectral forms moving through the ruined halls. These apparitions often appear as shadowy figures in the corners of the eye, vanishing when looked at directly. Some have described seeing faint, ghostly outlines of patients sitting on the broken stone benches or pacing in the empty corridors. Their movements slow and unnatural, as though trapped between life and death. Others report sudden flashes of light or misty shapes floating through the open windows and collapsed walls. The interior of the hospital, though largely in ruins, still evokes a strong sense of presence. The long corridors, lined with crumbling walls and remnants of old partitioned rooms, carry strange echoes. Footsteps have been reported in empty wings, and soft murmurs or indistinct whispers seem to come from nowhere, reverberating off the stone in ways that make it impossible to determine their source. The temperature inside can fluctuate inexplicably, with sudden cold drafts brushing against visitors even on warm days, creating the unmistakable sensation that someone or something is watching. One of the most frequently cited areas for spectral sightings is the main ward, where patients were once treated in rows of beds. Though the furniture is long gone, the outline of the spaces remains visible, and visitors often report seeing shadows shifting across the walls, sometimes resembling seated patients or attendants moving quietly between beds. Some explorers describe hearing faint coughing or the scraping of shoes on the stone floor, sounds that vanish the moment they try to locate them. Others have captured inexplicable images on camera blurs, mist-like forms, or translucent figures appearing where no one could have been standing. The hospital's isolation adds to its eerie reputation. Set apart from the main areas of Roosevelt Island, surrounded by grass, brush, and the water beyond, the building appears even more desolate. On quiet days, the wind carries mournful whistles through the broken windows and gaps in the walls, blending with the faint sounds of the city in the distance to create an unsettling soundscape. Some visitors claim that at dusk, figures can be seen standing silently in the ruined arches, silhouetted against the setting sun, only to vanish when approached. The sense of history is palpable. Every cracked wall, jagged window, and decayed floorboard is a reminder of the hospital's grim past. The building was never meant to last indefinitely, yet even in its ruined state, it exerts a powerful presence. Many who explore the site leave with a lingering sense of unease, as though they have glimpsed echoes of lives that were trapped in suffering. For some, the haunting is psychological, a reaction to the knowledge of the hospital's past. For others, it feels much more immediate, a direct interaction with the residual energy of those who lived on died within its walls. Even the exterior of the hospital carries ghostly energy. The skeletal remains of towers and arches are visible from the surrounding park and waterfront, creating a dramatic silhouette against the sky. At night, the ruin takes on an almost otherworldly quality. Shadows cast by the crumbling stone seem to move independently of the wind, and the faint sound of footsteps or murmurs has been reported by those passing nearby. Local legend holds that the spirits of former patients and caretakers continue to wander the grounds, bound to the building by the trauma and isolation they experienced during its operational years. Roosevelt Island Smallpox Hospital is more than a historical relic. It is a monument to the suffering, isolation, and fear that defined a time when infectious disease was one of the greatest threats to human life. Its ruined halls, broken windows, and empty wards are reminders of the countless patients who passed through its doors, many never to leave. Those who enter its decaying corridors often report more than a sense of history. They feel the presence of lingering souls, the weight of forgotten treatment rooms, and the spectral forms that still move through the shadows. Even in its current state, as a partially roofless, crumbling shell, Roosevelt Island Smallpox Hospital continues to captivate the imagination and stir fear. Visitors describe it as a space where the past remains tangible, where the echoes of suffering are carried in the wind and walls. and where the boundary between the living and the dead feels unusually thin for anyone who walks its broken halls. The experience is both a journey through history and a confrontation with the lingering shadows of those who were once confined within its stone walls, a reminder that some places never truly let go of the lives that shaped them. Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, located in Queens, New York, has stood for more than a century as both a place of treatment and a reminder of the darker chapters of mental health care. Among its many structures, one building in particular has drawn more attention, fear, and legend than any other building. 25. Once part of a massive psychiatric complex that housed thousands of patients, Building 25 has long since been sealed off from the public. What remains today is a crumbling shell of concrete and brick, its boarded windows and decaying halls concealing a violent past that refuses to fade. For decades, it served as one of Creedmoor's most notorious wards, where the most unstable and aggressive patients were confined. The echoes of that pain still seem to reverberate through its howled screams, shadows, and whispers that no living voice can explain. The Creedmoor complex began in 1912 as the farm colony of Brooklyn State Hospital, offering open-air therapy and agricultural work as part of its treatment model. But as New York City's population grew, so did the number of patients admitted. By the mid-20th century, the institution held more than 7,000 people, many of whom suffered from severe mental illness. Conditions deteriorated rapidly. Overcrowding, limited staff, and outdated methods turned what was once intended as a place of healing into a place of neglect and despair. Among its dozens of buildings, Building 25 became known as the most violent home to patients considered dangerous, unmanageable, or completely beyond help. Inside Building 25, the atmosphere was suffocating. Patients were often restrained, both physically and chemically, to prevent self-harm or attacks on others. The long, narrow hallways echoed with the sounds of shouting, crying, and sometimes the dull thuds of fights breaking out between residents. Nurses and orderlies worked under constant stress, and stories from former staff suggest that assaults were common, both by patients and occasionally by those tasked with controlling them. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting pale shadows on tiled floors, while the smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat and fear. Those who have entered the building since its closure describe an overwhelming sense of dread that clings to the air. The structure has deteriorated, with peeling paint, shattered glass, and rusting metal bars still covering the windows. Broken hospital beds and old wheelchairs remain scattered through the rooms. On the walls, faded notes and scrawled markings are reminders of the people who once lived within its confines. Some explorers report that it feels as though the building is still alive, breathing faintly in the creaks of its walls and the moans of shifting metal. But it's the sounds that disturb visitors the most. Many have reported hearing faint screams echoing from somewhere deep within the structure. These cries seem to drift through the hallways, indistinct yet unmistakably human, fading in and out as if moving from one floor to another. Some claim to have heard frantic footsteps running in the distance, or the sound of doors slamming shut, even though every entrance has long been sealed. Others report whispers that seem to come from just behind them, soft, unintelligible murmurs that stop abruptly when they turn around. The most common sighting at Building 25 is of shadow figures. Witnesses describe dark, human-shaped forms moving quickly across doorways or standing at the ends of hallways. These figures are sometimes motionless, sometimes darting away the moment they're noticed. They are seen in groups or alone, sometimes so clearly that visitors mistake them for other people before realizing they are alone. Paranormal investigators who have brought equipment into the building claim to have recorded strange anomalies, cold spots, electromagnetic fluctuations, and voices captured on EVP devices that say things like "help me" or "stay here." The basement of Building 25 is considered the epicenter of its haunting. This level once contained isolation rooms and storage areas where particularly violent or unstable patients were restrained for long periods. The temperature here is noticeably lower, even in the heat of summer. People entering the basement have reported sudden waves of nausea, overwhelming sadness, or panic that forced them to leave within minutes. One urban explorer claimed to see the faint outline of a figure sitting in the corner of a dark cell, only to find it empty when shining a light. Another described hearing the metallic rattle of restraints dragging across the floor, followed by a low moan that grew louder before abruptly cutting off. Even the upper floors carry their share of eerie phenomena. Doors have been known to open and close on their own. Windows, though mostly boarded up, sometimes let in faint drafts that cause papers or debris to move across the floor as if stirred by unseen hands. Lights from flashlights occasionally flicker out for no apparent reason, plunging explorers into momentary darkness before abruptly returning. Some have left the building convinced they were followed. Reporting footsteps behind them all the way to the exit, only to turn around and find no one there. Locals who live near Creedmoor have their own stories. Security guards and maintenance workers who patrol the grounds after dark sometimes hear sounds coming from the direction of Building 25 metal, clanging, faint voices, or even music from an unseen source. One former guard claimed that he once saw lights flickering in the upper windows late at night, long after power had been disconnected. When he investigated the next morning, he found nothing but empty rooms and silence. Another resident said that when the wind blows across the grounds, it carries the echo of screams, as if the building itself still remembers the suffering that took place inside. Though Creedmoor Psychiatric Center continues to operate in a limited capacity, many of its old buildings have been shuttered, abandoned to time and decay. Building 25 remains sealed, its entrances welded shut. Yet stories persist of people who find their way inside and come back changed. They speak of an energy that feels sentient, of a heaviness that follows them for days afterward. Some refuse to talk about what they saw, claiming the experience was too disturbing to revisit. To this day, the legend surrounding Building 25 grows stronger with each passing year. It is a place where history, trauma, and the supernatural intertwine, where the screams of the past still seem to echo through empty halls, and the shadows of former patients move just beyond the reach of light. The oppressive silence that hangs over the building feels unnatural, broken only by the faintest of sounds, a creak, a whisper, a distant cry. Creedmoor's Building 25 stands as a monument to a forgotten era of psychiatric care, a crumbling structure that has absorbed decades of pain, violence, and fear. Whether the echoes within its walls are born of restless spirits or the residual energy of human suffering, one thing remains certain: those who venture near it never forget the feeling of being watched, of standing in a place where the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin, and where the ghosts of the past still wander in endless unrest. St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. stands as one of the oldest and most infamous psychiatric institutions in the United States. Built in the mid-19th century and once considered a model for compassionate mental health treatment, it has since become a place steeped in both history and haunting. The massive complex, spread over several hundred acres on a hill overlooking the Anacostia River, is a maze of old wards, underground tunnels, and crumbling wings that have long since been abandoned. Over the years, countless patients passed through its doors: soldiers, civilians, the mentally ill, and even some of the country's most dangerous individuals. But while medicine and time have moved forward, something about St. Elizabeth's has never truly settled. Its empty corridors still seem to breathe with whispers of the past, and many say that the dead have never left. When the hospital first opened in 1855, it was officially known as the Government Hospital for the Insane. It was meant to be a progressive refuge, a place of light and air, away from the darkness of city asylums. The hospital's founder, Dorothea Dix, envisioned it as a sanctuary for healing. For a time, it lived up to that promise. During the Civil War, St. Elizabeth's even treated wounded soldiers, and the grounds were filled with tents and makeshift wards. But as decades passed, the facility grew beyond its capacity. By the early 20th century, it was overcrowded and understaffed. The ideal of humane treatment gave way to harsh realities: electroshock therapy, isolation rooms, and experimental procedures that left scars both physical and emotionally. Those who endured them. Today, much of the old hospital lies in ruin. Red brick buildings with Gothic arches stand silent against the skyline, their windows shattered and halls thick with dust. Some of the newer sections remain in use, but the older wings, especially the West Campus, are sealed off, their decaying interiors a frozen glimpse into another time. It's within those forgotten wings that the stories of haunting are strongest. Visitors, security personnel, and even contractors working on restoration projects have all reported inexplicable experiences. Those who enter the abandoned sections describe an immediate change in atmosphere. The air feels heavy, thick with moisture and memory. The floors creak underfoot, and the faint smell of antiseptic and mildew fills the air. The sound of dripping water echoes through the halls, though no one can ever find the source. Some report feeling watched from the shadows, as though unseen eyes are tracking every movement. Others say they felt a sudden drop in temperature so intense that their breath becomes visible, even in summer. These cold spots often appear near former patient rooms, where the metal bed frames still stand rusted against peeling paint. One of the most well-known legends involves the long corridor of the West Building, a hallway said to stretch endlessly in both directions. Late at night, guards making rounds claim to see shapes moving just beyond the beam of their flashlights, dark silhouettes gliding across doorways or standing motionless at the far end. When approached, the figures vanish without a sound. Some have heard the faint squeak of wheels, like a gurney being pushed across the floor. Even though the old hospital beds were removed decades ago, phantom voices are another common report. They come in whispers, murmurs, and sometimes full cries. A soft humming has been heard in the nurses' quarters, as if someone unseen is still performing their nightly rounds. In one particularly chilling account, a contractor working in the East Wing claimed to hear a woman softly reciting something that sounded like a prayer. When he called out, the voice stopped, but the air around him grew freezing cold. He left immediately and refused to return. The tunnels beneath St. Elizabeth's are perhaps the most unsettling part of the entire hospital. Built to connect the various buildings, they once served as passageways for staff, patients, and supplies. Now, they are sealed off to the public. But stories persist of strange noises emanating from below, metallic bangs, echoing footsteps, and deep groans that seem to come from the earth itself. Workers who have ventured into the tunnels for maintenance describe feeling disoriented, as though time moves differently underground. Some emerge pale and shaken, claiming to have seen faint figures following them at a distance, never quite catching up. Even outside, the grounds have an eerie quiet. Many who visit report seeing lights flickering in the upper windows of buildings long since abandoned. Others have spotted faint figures standing near the old courtyard, at night sometimes appearing as nurses in white uniforms or patients in hospital gowns. These apparitions often fade when approached, leaving behind only the rustle of leaves and the faint scent of something sterile, like alcohol or iodine. One particularly infamous story centers on the old forensic building, which once housed some of the hospital's most dangerous and disturbed patients. During the 20th century, this wing treated individuals deemed criminally insane, and many died within its walls. Even after the building was closed, guards reported hearing violent pounding from inside, as if someone were trying to break free. One former employee claimed that the elevator in the forensic wing sometimes operated on its own, its doors opening and closing, lights flickering, despite being disconnected from power. There are also tales of a shadow figure, known as the Man in the Hall. He is said to appear in the central building near the staircase that leads to the administrative offices. Witnesses describe him as tall, with indistinct features, wearing what looks like a hospital uniform from the 1940s. He never speaks, never moves quickly, just stands there, as if waiting for someone to notice. When anyone tries to approach, he fades into the darkness. Those who've seen him claim to feel an overwhelming sense of sorrow and dread, followed by a cold breeze that chills them to the bone. Though much of St. Elizabeth's has been renovated or repurposed, its haunted reputation persists. Paranormal investigators have captured unexplained voices on audio recorders, sudden drops in temperature, and images showing glowing orbs and shadowy shapes. The hospital's history of suffering combined with decades of neglect seems to have left a mark too deep to erase. Even now, as construction crews work to restore parts of the grounds, there are stories that tools go missing, alarms trigger without cause, and footsteps echo through locked hallways after dark. Some workers have refused to stay past sunset, claiming that the building feels awake at night, as though the walls themselves are listening. St. Elizabeth's Hospital remains a haunting monument to the history of mental health in America, a place where hope, pain, and fear have long coexisted. Its abandoned corridors still hold the echoes of those who once lived and died there. Whether the shadows and voices are remnants of human suffering or something far beyond understanding, one thing is certain: St. Elizabeth's has not forgotten its past. And on quiet nights, when the city around it sleeps, the hospital still whispers. Ancora Psychiatric Hospital, officially known for years as the Camden County Health Services Center, stands quietly among the pine trees of southern New Jersey. Once a place of hope and healing, it has since become a sprawling complex of silence and shadow. Founded in the 1950s, Ancora was designed as a modern mental health facility meant to replace the overcrowded and decaying asylums of the past. For a time, it served thousands of patients, offering treatments that ranged from counseling and medication to more extreme therapies. But as decades passed, the institution began to fall into neglect. Budgets tightened, wings were shuttered, and stories began to spread, stories that suggested something remained inside the walls, long after the doctors and patients had gone. The hospital still functions in part today, though many of its buildings have been abandoned for years. Those empty wings are the ones that draw the curious and the brave, the urban explorers, the paranormal investigators, and those simply drawn to the macabre. From the outside, Ancora's disused sections look like any forgotten medical facility. Overgrown paths, cracked windows, and ivy creeping across faded brick. But the deeper one goes inside, the more the atmosphere changes. The air grows heavier, as if carrying the weight of every forgotten life that passed through. Stepping into the unused wards feels like entering a time capsule of despair. Rusted medical carts still line the corridors. Cabinets hang open, their glass doors shattered, and inside are rows of dust-covered bottles labeled with long-forgotten medicines. In one room, a patient chart lies open on a desk, the ink faded to brown, the words barely legible. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks slowly back and forth on its hinges, though there's no wind to move it. Visitors often describe the same eerie feeling, that someone unseen is standing just behind them, watching, waiting. The strangest part of Ancora isn't what you see, but what you feel. Many who have explored the darkened halls speak of an invisible presence brushing against them, a light touch on the arm or shoulder, cold and fleeting, but unmistakable. Some say it feels like a hand reaching out in confusion, or perhaps a plea for help from those who never left. Others describe sudden chills that cut through the air, so sharp they leave goosebumps rising even in the summer heat. It's as though the building itself is alive, breathing softly in the dark. One of the most frequently told stories centers around the old surgical wing. During the hospital's height, in the mid-20th century, this was where the most severe cases were treated. Patients underwent electroshock therapy, insulin coma therapy, and, in earlier years, even lobotomies. Many of those treatments, now considered inhumane, were thought at the time to be breakthroughs. But they left scars on minds, on bodies, and, some believe, on the building itself. Today, the operating rooms are silent, except for the occasional drip of water from a leaking ceiling. Rusted lamps hang overhead, casting strange shadows when the flashlight beam passes over them. Visitors claim that, if you stand quietly enough, you can still hear the faint hum of old machinery, or the clatter of instruments being prepared by hands that no longer exist. Security guards who patrol the active parts of the hospital sometimes refuse to go near the abandoned sections after dark. One guard recounted hearing metallic scraping noises echoing from the old treatment rooms, as if something were being dragged across the floor. When he went to investigate, the sound stopped abruptly. He found nothing, there only dust and a faint outline of a hospital bed imprinted on the tile. Another guard swore he heard muffled voices one night to people talking softly in a room that had been locked for years. When he finally got the door open, it was empty. The only thing inside was a metal tray, holding a few rusted scalpels left behind decades ago. In the basement tunnels that once connected the buildings, the atmosphere grows even more oppressive. These tunnels were used to transport patients discreetly between wards, especially those undergoing experimental treatments. They're narrow, damp, and lined with pipes that hiss faintly, making it hard to tell where the noises come from. People who have ventured down there report hearing footsteps that don't belong to their group, echoing ahead of them or trailing just behind. Some say they've seen shadows darting across the dim light, too quick to be human. Others have described a sound like breathing in the dark, slow and heavy, that fades the moment they turn on their flashlights. Medical equipment still litters the rooms, rusted stretchers, wheelchairs frozen mid-roll, and heart monitors long since dead. In some corners, you can still find patient restraints tied to beds, their leather straps cracked and frayed with age. The air smells of rot and mildew, but beneath it lingers a strange chemical scent, sharp and sterile, as if the ghosts of disinfectants refuse to fade. One former nurse who worked there in the 1980s said she could never forget that smell. It was the scent of the old wards, the smell of fear and desperation that clung to the walls no matter how hard they scrubbed. Perhaps the most unsettling stories involved the children's ward, which was closed decades ago. Explorers who entered that part of the hospital described toys still scattered across the floor, dolls with missing eyes, tricycles rusted in place, faded murals of smiling suns, and clouds peeling from the walls. Some have claimed to hear laughter echoing faintly through the corridor, high and distant, though there are no children for miles. Others report the faint sound of musica, lullaby playing softly, as if from a broken speaker hidden somewhere deep in the building. When they try to find the source, it stops. Despite all the warnings, people still sneak into Ancora's abandoned wings, drawn by the thrill of the unknown. Many leave shaken. Some refuse to talk about what they saw. A few have left in tears, insisting they'll never go back. One urban explorer described feeling something cold and heavy pressed against his chest as he turned a corner. He dropped his flashlight and ran, swearing he heard footsteps chasing him all the way to the exit. When he looked back, the hall was empty, but a long smear of dust on the floor looked disturbingly like handprints reaching toward the door. There's a theory among paranormal investigators that places of great suffering hold echoes of emotion imprinted on the environment itself. If that's true, then Ancora Psychiatric Hospital is a library of lost voices, a place where anguish, fear, and loneliness have been recorded in the walls. Every creak, every whisper, every sudden chill could be a memory replaying itself over and over. Today, the state occasionally discusses demolishing some of the old structures, but nothing ever seems to move forward. Perhaps it's because of money, or perhaps, as some locals like to say, the hospital doesn't want to be forgotten. It sits quietly among the trees, its broken windows like dark eyes watching the world move on. Inside, the silence waits, broken only by the faint echo of something that brushes past in the dark. Unseen but always there, reminding anyone who dares to enter that Ancora never truly sleeps. Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane stands on the windswept shores of Seneca Lake in Ovid, New York, its vast and aging buildings slowly surrendering to time. Opened in 1869, it was one of the largest and most self-contained psychiatric institutions ever constructed. For over a century, it was a place where thousands of souls were brought, often forgotten, and rarely ever left alive. Its grounds, once busy with staff, patients, and the hum of daily routines, now echo only with the sighing wind and the faint sounds that seem to rise from the earth itself, whispers, footsteps, and the occasional cry that no one can explain. The asylum was created with the intention of compassion. It was meant to give dignity and care to those labeled as chronic cases, patients who were considered beyond hope by other hospitals. Unlike the overcrowded and brutal asylums of the 19th century, Willard was envisioned as a model institution. It had its own farms, workshops, even a morgue and a cemetery. The goal was to create a self-sufficient community where patients could live out their days in peace. But as decades passed, the line between care and captivity blurred. The facility grew, the population swelled, and conditions slowly decayed into neglect. By the early 20th century, more than 4,000 people lived within Willard's sprawling complex. The asylum had become a small city of its own, long corridors connecting dormitories, treatment wards, kitchens, and recreation rooms. Patients were kept busy with labor. Some worked the fields, others sewed uniforms or baked bread. Yet, behind the facade of order, darkness festered. Many of those committed to Willard never saw the outside world again. Families dropped them off and never returned. Medical records tell stories of isolation, despair, and illness left untreated. The cemetery behind the asylum still bears silent witness to this forgotten history. More than 5,000 patients were buried there over the years, their graves marked only by numbered iron stakes, no names, no epitaphs. Only later, when records were uncovered, did families learn where their lost relatives had gone. The anonymity of those burials weighs heavily on the grounds, as though the land itself remembers every soul who died within those walls. Visitors who walk through the old graveyard speak of the atmosphere changing without warning, a sudden stillness in the air, an inexplicable drop in temperature, or the faint sound of murmuring voices carried on the breeze. After the asylum closed in 1995, most of its buildings were left untouched. Inside, time seemed to freeze. Patient rooms still hold old iron beds, decaying mattresses, and discarded clothing. Medical charts remain stacked on desks. One of the most haunting discoveries came years after its closure: hidden attic, filled with over 400 suitcases belonging to patients who had been admitted and never discharged. Inside those dusty cases were fragments of lives interrupted, family photos, letters, children's toys, wedding rings. It was as if each suitcase held the last hope of a person who entered the asylum expecting to one day leave. Explorers who have entered Willard's abandoned wards describe an oppressive feeling that begins almost immediately. The halls stretch endlessly in both directions, lined with rusting metal doors and broken windows that filter in thin, cold light. The sound of footsteps often echoes unnaturally, as though someone or something is following close behind. In some rooms, old wheelchairs remain in place, frozen mid-turn, as if the patients simply vanished. The air carries a faint chemical smell, mixed with mildew, and at times, a sweetness that seems to drift from nowhere. Many who have dared to enter Willard speak of hearing disembodied voices, whispers that fade into silence, muffled sobbing, or the sound of someone calling a name that no one recognizes. A few claim to have seen figures standing at the far ends of hallways, motionless and indistinct. One urban explorer recounted seeing a woman dressed in a white hospital gown crossing a corridor before disappearing into a locked room. When he opened the door, moments later, the room was empty, except for a single chair swaying gently, as if someone had just risen from it. The old treatment wing, where electroshock therapy and early psychiatric experiments were performed, is said to be the most active area. Strange noises echo their metallic clanging, doors slamming, and what some describe as faint screams. Flashlights sometimes flicker without explanation, and batteries drain within minutes. Paranormal investigators have reported capturing electronic voice phenomena, soft whispers that respond directly to questions. One recording, when played back, revealed the woman's voice saying, "Help me leave." Another captured a man's voice murmuring, "They forgot us." The asylum's basement and tunnels are equally notorious. These underground passages once connected the main buildings to service areas, the morgue, and the crematorium. They were used to transport patients discreetly or move supplies out of sight. Today, those tunnels are choked with debris, water, and mold. Visitors who enter describe the air as heavy, almost unbreathable. Some claim to feel hands brush against them, or to hear the slow dragging of footsteps behind them. One chilling tale involves a security worker who patrolled the grounds late one night. As he passed one of the boarded-up entrances, he heard the sound of a woman softly humming. When he shone his flashlight, the humming stopped, but a pale face appeared for a split second behind the broken glass. then vanished. Even during daylight, the aura of Willard Asylum is unmistakable. The massive red brick buildings loom over the landscape like sleeping giants, their windows dark and hollow. The wind, through the broken panes, produces a low, mournful whistle that seems almost like a sigh. On foggy mornings, the entire campus disappears into a ghostly haze, making it easy to imagine the shadows of long-departed patients still wandering the grounds. Locals who live nearby say lights sometimes flicker in the windows at night, even though the electricity has been disconnected for years. Others have reported seeing shapes in the upper floors, figures pacing back and forth, visible only for a moment before fading into the darkness. What remains of Willard is more than just a collection of ruins. It's a monument to forgotten lives. Each hallway, each peeling wall, and each silent room carries the memory of those who lived and died within. The asylum's energy is palpable, a mix of sorrow, confusion, and longing that seems to seep from the very bricks. People who visit often leave with a sense of unease that lingers long after they've gone, as though something from the asylum has followed them home. The voices, the shadows, the cold rush of unseen presences all are part of the legend now. Willard Asylum may stand empty, but it is not silent. Its walls still breathe with the weight of thousands of stories, most untold and unrecorded. Those who enter speak of the overwhelming sense that they are not alone, that the patients who once filled its wards never truly left. The asylum endures as both a historical monument and a place where the veil between the living and the dead seems unusually thin, where every whisper of the wind might be a voice from the past, still waiting to be heard. Thank you for staying with us through the peeling paint, the empty wards, the soft echo of footsteps, and the shadows behind every door. These 25 hospitals once held hope, healing, and now, in many cases, only whispers. If you ever find yourself next to these dilapidated buildings, remember the stories of the past are never fully gone. If you liked this journey into darkness, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like or a comment if you've encountered something unexplainable yourself. Until next time, I hope your dreams are calm, your nights are quiet, and that nothing waits for you in the dark. Goodbye, and don't look behind you.